Section 30 of Benjamin Franklin, Self-Revealed, Volume 1, by William Bruce. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7, Franklin's French Friends, Part 1. To the host of friends mentioned above, numerous as it was, another great addition was to be made when Franklin became one of our envoys to France. In the various colonies of America, so unlike each other in many respects, in England, in Scotland, his liberal instincts and quick sympathies ran out into new social forms almost with the fluid ease of the melted tallow which he had poured in his boyhood into his father's candle molds. But of all the impressions that he ever derived from any society, that which was made upon him by French society certifies most strikingly to the wonderful plasticity of his nature under the pressure of new conditions. So permeated did he, one of the truest progenitors of distinctively American ideas and attributes, and one of the truest exponents of the robust Anglo-Saxon character, become with the genius of the French people, that a Frenchman, Henri Martin, the historian, has declared that he was of a mind altogether French in its grace and elasticity. There was a time, of course, when Franklin, apart from the inveteracy of the old English prejudice which believed that upon every pair of English legs marched 3 Frenchmen, had no good blood for the French because of the agony in which they had for so many years, with the aid of their savage friends, kept the colonial frontier. I fancy that intriguing nation would like very well to meddle on occasion and blow up the coals between Britain and her colonies, but I hope we shall give them no opportunity. This was his quiet comment even as late as 1767 in a letter to William Franklin upon the sedulous attentions recently paid to him by Monsieur Durand, the French plenipotentiary in London, whose masters were fully awake to the fact that the quarrel between Great Britain and her colonies might be a pretty one from a point of view of French interests, and that in duels it is not the pistols but the seconds that kill. But this was politics. Long before Franklin crossed the Atlantic on his French mission, he had felt during his visits to France in 1767 and 1769 the bewitching influence of social conditions, perpetually enlivened and refreshed by the vivacity and inventive resource which were such conspicuous features of his own character. After his return from France in 1767, he wrote to Dalibard, "The time I spent in Paris and in the improving conversation and agreeable society of so many learned and ingenious men seems now to me like a pleasing dream, from which I was sorry to be awaked by finding myself again at London." These agreeable impressions were confirmed by his return to France in 1769, after stating in a letter to Dupont de Nemours in the succeeding year that he expected to return to America in the ensuing summer. He exclaimed, "Would to God I could take with me Messieurs Dupont, Dubourg, and some other French friends with their good ladies. I might then, by mixing them with my friends in Philadelphia, form a little happy society that would prevent my ever wishing again to visit Europe." It was therefore to no entirely novel social conditions that Franklin was introduced when he found himself again in France in 1776. At any rate, no chameleon was ever quicker to absorb the color of his latest background. As time elapsed, nothing but his inability to write and speak French with the facility of a native-born Frenchman separated him in a social sense from the mass of French men and women, by whom he was admired, courted, and flattered almost from the day that he set foot in France until the day that he was conveyed in one of the Queen's litters to the coast on his return to America. How far this assimilation was the deliberate achievement of a wise man who never failed to act upon the principle that the best way of managing men is to secure their goodwill first, how far but the unconscious self-adjustment of a pliable disposition, it is impossible to say. but there can be no doubt about the amazing sympathy with which Franklin entered into the social life of the French people. Beneath the gay, pleasure-loving exterior that he presented to French society, there was always the thought of that land oversea, so singularly blessed by Providence with material comfort and equality of fortune, with the general diffusion of education and enlightenment, and with political institutions bound to the past only by the wisdom of experience. Always beneath that exterior, too, was a glowing resentment of the wrongs that England had inflicted upon America, an enthusiastic sense of the glorious cause in which America was engaged, and a resolution as fixed as the eye of Nemesis that no hand but the hand of America itself should fill out the outlines of the imperial destiny in which he had once been so eagerly, even pathetically, desirous that England should share. But these were thoughts and purposes reserved for the hours of business, or of confidential intercourse with his American compatriots, or for such moments as the one when he heard of the fall of Philadelphia and the surrender of Burgoyne. In his purely social relations with the French people, he preserved only enough of his republican ideas, dress, and manners to give a certain degree of piquancy to his ensemble. He adopted French usages and customs. He composed exquisite little stories and dialogues in the French manner, and old as he was, he made love like a French gallant. As it is always fair weather in our parlors, it is at Paris always peace, he wrote to the Chevalier de la Luzerne. And this remark comes home to us with full force when we remember with what unrestrained gaiety of heart, notwithstanding the shudder sent through him at times by the American War, he enjoyed the social life of Paris. Long before he left France, he had learnt to love the country and its people with a sincere, fervent attachment. After saying in a letter to Josiah Quincy that the French had certainly advanced in politeness and civility many degrees beyond the English, he paid them this compliment: "I find them here a most amiable nation to live with. The Spaniards are by common opinion supposed to be cruel, the English proud, the Scotch insolent, the Dutch avaricious, etc. But I think the French have no national vice ascribed to them. They have some frivolities, but they are harmless. To dress their heads so that a hat cannot be put on them, and then wear their hats under their arms, and to fill their noses with tobacco may be called follies, perhaps, but they are not vices. They are only the effects of the tyranny of custom. In short, there is nothing wanting in the character of a Frenchman that belongs to that of an agreeable and worthy man. There are only some trifles surplus, or which might be spared. These, however, are but frigid words in comparison with those subsequently employed by him in relation to a country where, to use his own language, everybody strove to make him happy. The French are an amiable people to live with, he told his old friend Captain Nathaniel Falconer. They love me, and I love them. In a later letter to William Franklin, he said, I'm here among a people that love and respect me, a most amiable nation to live with, and perhaps I may conclude to die among them, for my friends in America are dying off, one after another, and I have been so long abroad that I should now be almost a stranger in my own country. Nor did the love for France that he took back with him to the United States grow at all fainter with absence and the flow of time. To the Duc de la Rochefoucauld he wrote from Philadelphia, I love France. I have 1,000 reasons for doing so, and whatever promotes or impedes her happiness affects me as if she were my mother. To Madame Lavoisier he used terms that communicate to us an even more vivid conception of the ambrosial years that he had passed in France. These, he said, referring to his good fortune and his old age in its different aspects, are the blessings of God, and depend on his continued goodness. Yet all do not make me forget Paris, and 9 years' happiness I enjoyed there, in the sweet society of a people whose conversation is instructive, whose manners are highly pleasing, and who, above all the nations of the world, have in the greatest perfection the art of making themselves beloved by strangers. And now, even in my sleep, I find that the scenes of all my pleasant dreams are laid in that city or in its neighborhood. Mingled with these pleasant dreams, it is safe to say, were some of the lively and charming women to whose embraces he submitted, if his sister Jane was not misinformed, in a spirit quite remote from that of the rigors of penance. You mentioned the kindness of the French ladies to me, he wrote to Elizabeth Partridge, whose husband was the superintendent of the almshouse in Boston. I must explain that matter. This is the civilest nation upon earth. Your first acquaintances endeavour to find out what you like, and they tell others, if 'tis understood that you like mutton, dine where you will, you find mutton. Somebody, it seems, gave it out that I loved ladies, and then everybody presented me their ladies, or the ladies presented themselves to be embraced, that is, to have their necks kissed. For as to kissing of lips or cheeks, it is not the mode here. The first is reckoned rude, and the other may rub off the paint. The French ladies have, however, 1,000 other ways of rendering themselves agreeable by their various attentions and civilities, and their sensible conversation. 'Tis a delightful people to live with. I hope, however, he wrote to another correspondent after denying a story about himself, to preserve while I stay the regard you mention of the French ladies, for their society and conversation, when I have time to enjoy them, are extremely agreeable. And that the French ladies found his society and conversation extremely agreeable, no one can well doubt who has had occasion to become familiar with the scented missives, full of artful coquetry, that were addressed by many fair hands to Très cher papa, or dear American papa, or amiable papa, when he was in the land where somebody had been so considered as to give it out that he liked ladies. At times these notes run along in mingled French and English, as if the writers were determined to bring to bear upon him the blandishments not only of the former language, but of his own familiar tongue besides. Je veux envoyer a sweet kiss, dear papa. Envoyez-moi en revanche un mot de réponse, was one languishing request. Even Franklin's bad French mattered but little when a woman, Madame Brillon, whom the daughter of Abigail Adams pronounced one of the handsomest women in France, could write to him. It is always very good French to say, Je vous aime. My heart always goes out to meet this word when you say it to me. From such words as these to his saying that the best master of languages is a mistress, the transition was not very difficult. It was at Passy, then a suburb of Paris, that Franklin resided during the 8½ years that he was one of our representatives in France. His surroundings were thus described by him in reply to a question from Mrs. Stevenson. You wish to know how I live. It is in a fine house, situated in a neat village, on high ground, 1/2 mile from Paris, with a large garden to walk in. I have abundance of acquaintance, dine abroad 6 days in 7. Sundays I reserve to dine at home with such Americans as pass this way. And then I have my grandson Ben, with some other American children from his school. The house mentioned by Franklin was known as the Basse Cour de Monsieur le Rey de Chaumont, and had originally, with the inscription over its door, Se sta bene non si muove, not been unknown to fame as the Hôtel de Valentinois. Indeed, John Locke, who visited Paris in 1679, declared that it was among the 24 belles maisons in Paris that best rewarded the curiosity of the stranger at that time. The circumstances under which it passed into the possession of Franklin were another proof of the flaming zeal with which many of the foremost inhabitants of France espoused the cause of the colonies. Chaumont was grand maître des eaux et forêts de France, and intendant honoraire des Invalides, a friend of the Duc de Choiseul, and a man of large wealth, with a chateau on the Loire, as well as the mansion at Passy, of which the building occupied by Franklin was a part. In his generous enthusiasm for American liberty, he declined a post in the French ministry offered to him by Choiseul, because he thought that by declining it he might be a more useful intermediary between America and the French government. When John Adams came to Passy and found a home under the same roof with Franklin, he felt obliged to write to Chaumont, asking him to consider what rent they should pay to him for the use of his house and furniture. Every part of Chaumont's conduct towards him and Americans in general, and in all their affairs, he said, had been polite and obliging, as far as he had an opportunity of observing, and he had no doubt it would continue. But it was not reasonable that they should occupy such an elegant mansion without any compensation to the owner, and it was not right that they should live at too great or too uncertain an expense to their constituents. The reply of Chaumont was worthy of a paladin of ancient France. When I consecrated my home to Dr. Franklin and his associates who might live with him, he said, I made it fully understood that I should expect no compensation, because I perceived that you had need of all your means to send to the succor of your country, or to relieve the distresses of your countrymen escaping from the chains of their enemies. This is a world, however, in which it is too much to expect an absolutely free gift of house rent, and the answer of Chaumont to John Adams does not altogether agree with the version of the matter given by Franklin in a letter to Robert R. Livingston, in which he said that Chaumont had originally proposed to leave the article of rent unsettled until the end of the war, and then to accept for it a piece of American land from the Congress, such as they might judge equivalent. Considering the serious uncertainty as to whether there would then be any Congress, this was quite generous enough. It is painful to relate, however, that Chaumont engaged so recklessly in the hazardous business of shipping supplies to America for the Patriot Army as to become involved in pecuniary embarrassments, which produced some degree of temporary constraint in his intercourse with Franklin. I find that in these affairs with him, a bargain, though ever so clearly expressed, signifies nothing, wrote Franklin in a moment of disgust with his volatility to Jonathan Williams. A few months before, Franklin had made this entry in a journal kept by him during a brief portion of his residence at Passy: visited Monsieur de Chaumont in the evening, found him cold and dry. But before Franklin left France, the old cordiality of intercourse appears to have been fully re-established, for we find the two dining with each other again, and besides, when Franklin was on his way to the sea-coast, on his return to America, Chaumont and his daughter accompanied him part of the way. The entire restoration of good feeling between the two men is also shown in the letters and conduct of Franklin after his return to America. Chaumont was one of the group of French friends favored by him with gifts of the Franklin myrtle wax soap, thought, he said, to be the best in the world for shaving and for washing chintzes and other things of delicate colors. In one of his letters from Philadelphia, Franklin tells Chaumont that Donatien Loret, Chaumont the younger, who had come over to America to press certain claims of the elder Chaumont against the United States, was out at that time with his son Batch and some others on a hunt. It is in this letter, by the way, that he said of Fink, his maître d'hôtel at Passy, who was pretending that he was not wholly paid, he was continually saying of himself, "Je suis honnête homme, je suis honnête homme," but I always suspected he was mistaken, and so it proves. In another letter he wrote to Chaumont: "I frequently the pleasure of seeing your valuable son, whom I love as my own," and in this letter he sent his love to all Chaumont's children in France, one of whom he was in the habit of addressing as ma femme, another as ma chère amie, and still another as mon enfant. Present my affectionate respects to Madame de Chaumont, and love to Madame Foucault, to ma femme, ma chère amie, et mon enfant, was one of his messages to Chaumont. This Madame Foucault was the favorite mentioned by William Temple Franklin when he wrote to his grandfather some 9 months after the latter found the manner of Chaumont cold and dry. All the family, the Chaumonts, send their love to you, and the beautiful Madame Foucault accompanies hers with an English kiss. A challenge of that kind was always promptly caught up by Franklin. "Thanks to Madame Foucault," he replied, "for her kindness in sending me the kiss. It was grown cold, by the way. I hope for a warm one when we meet." An amusing observation of Madame Chaumont, which has its value as an illustration of 18th-century manners in France, is quoted in a letter from Franklin to John Paul Jones. "L'Abbé Rouchon had just been telling me and Madame Chaumont," wrote Franklin, "that the old gardener and his wife had complained to the curate of your having attacked her in the garden about 7 o'clock the evening before your departure, and attempted to ravish her, relating all the circumstances, some of which are not fit for me to write. The serious part of it was, yet 3 of her sons were determined to kill you if you had not gone off. The rest occasioned some laughing, for the old woman, being one of the grossest, coarsest, dirtiest, and ugliest that we may find in 1,000, Madame Chaumont said it gave a high idea of the strength of appetite and courage of the Americans. A day or 2 after, I learnt yet it was the femme de chambre of Mademoiselle Chaumont, who had disguised herself in a suit, I think, of your clothes, to divert herself under that masquerade, as is customary the last evening of Carnival, and that meeting the old woman in the garden, she took it into her head to try her chastity, which it seems was found proof." The wit of Madame de Chaumont, however, shows to better advantage in connection with another incident. One of Franklin's friends was Mademoiselle Passy, a beautiful girl whom he was in the habit of calling, so John Adams tells us, his favorite and his flame and his love, which flattered the family and did not displease the young lady. When her engagement to the Marquis de Tonnerre was announced, Madame de Chaumont exclaimed to Franklin, Hélas, tous les conducteurs de Monsieur Franklin n'ont pas empêché le tonnerre de tomber sur Mademoiselle de Passy. Franklin himself was entirely too good a conductor of wit not to pass a thing like this on. It gives me great pleasure, madam, my respected neighbor, he said in a letter to Madame de Boulainvilliers, the mother of the simile upon whom the Marquis was about to descend, to learn that our lovely child is soon to be married with your approbation, and that we are not, however, to be immediately deprived of her company. I assure you I shall make no use of my paratonnerre lightning rod to prevent this match. Franklin's republican simplicity began and ended with his unpowdered hair, worn straight and covered with the cap of marten fur, and his russet dress. At Passy he lived in a manner that Vergennes, accustomed to the splendor and profusion of European courts, might well call modest, but which was quite as lavish as was consistent with the reputation of a plain democrat or of a veritable philosopher. Under the terms of his contract with his maître d'hôtel, the latter was to provide déjeuner and dinner daily for 5 persons. The déjeuner was to consist of bread and butter, honey and coffee, or chocolate with sugar, and the dinner of a joint of beef or veal or mutton, followed by fowl or game, with 2 plats d'enfremont, 2 plats de légumes, et un plat de pâtisserie avec hors d'œuvre de beurre, cornichons, radis, etc. For dessert there were to be 2 de fruits en hiver et 4 en été. There were also to be at dinner 2 compotes, un assiette de fromage, un de biscuit et un de bonbons, and des glaces 2 fois par semaine et été et un fois en hiver. The cost of this service per month was 720 livres. There was also an allowance of 240 livres per month of 9 domestic servants, and of 400 livres per month for extra dinners for guests, making the total monthly cost of Franklin's table of 1,360 livres. And there was no lack of good wine, red or white, ordinary or extraordinary. In 1778 there were 1,180 bottles of wine and rum in the cellar at Passy, and some 4½ years later there were 1,203. Franklin also maintained the carriage and coachman at a cost of 5,018 livres per year. By a resolution of Congress, the salaries of the different commissioners of the United States and Europe were fixed at 11,428 livres tournois per annum, in addition to their reasonable expenses, and the total expenses of Franklin and France are computed by Smith to have been about $15,000 per annum, as a moderate sum, indeed, in comparison with the amount necessary to sustain the dignity of our minister to France at the present time. Nevertheless, the ménage at Passy was luxurious enough for him to be warned that it had been described at home by some of his guests in such terms as to provoke popular censure on the part of his countrymen. They must be contented for the future, Franklin said in the letter to John Adams, as I am with plain beef and pudding. The readers of Connecticut newspapers ought not to be troubled for any more accounts of our extravagance. For my own part, if I could sit down to dinner on a piece of excellent salt pork and pumpkin, I would not give a farthing for all the luxuries of Paris. After this time Franklin did not keep such an open house as before, considerably to the relief of his gout. Previously, if we may believe John Adams, he had made a practice of inviting everybody to dine with him on Sunday at Passy. Sometimes this company was made up exclusively or all but exclusively of Americans, and sometimes partly of Americans and partly of French, and now and then there was an Englishman or so. Miss Adams mentions a sumptuous dinner at which the members of the Adams family, the Marquis de Lafayette and his wife, Lord Mountmorris, an Irish volunteer, Dr. Jeffreys, and Paul Jones were guests. Another dinner is mentioned by her at which all the guests were Americans except Monsieur Briand, who had dropped in. He said, "A demander un dîner à Père Franklin." A whimsical story is told by Jefferson of still another dinner, at which One half of the guests were Americans and one half French. Among the last, he says, was the Abbé Raynal. During the dinner he got on his favorite theory of the degeneracy of animals, and even of men in America, and urged it with his usual eloquence. The doctor at length, noticing the accidental stature and position of his guests at table, "Come," says he, "Monsieur l'Abbé, let us try this question by the fact before us. We are here one half Americans and one half French, and it happens that the Americans have placed themselves on one side of the table, and our French friends are on the other. Let both parties rise, and we shall see on which side nature has degenerated." It happened that his American guests were Carmichael, Harmer, Humphreys, and others of the finest stature and form, while those of the other side were remarkably diminutive, and the Abbé himself particularly was a mere shrimp. He parried the appeal, however, by a complimentary admission of exceptions, among which the doctor himself was a conspicuous one. Not the least interesting of the guests that Franklin drew around his table at Passy were lads who had a claim upon his notice, either because they were the sons or grandsons of friends or of his, or because they were friends of his grandson, Benjamin Franklin Batch. In a letter to Dr. Cooper, Franklin tells him that his grandson, Samuel Cooper Joe Hunnett, appeared a very promising lad, in whom he thought that the doctor would have much satisfaction, and was well on the preceding Sunday, when he had had the pleasure of his company to dinner with Mr. Adams' sons and some other young Americans. There is still in existence a letter from John Quincy Adams, then a boy of 11, to Franklin, which indicates that the latter had quite won his heart, though do what he might, he could never win the heart of the elder Adams. It was a brilliant society to which Franklin was introduced after the first reserve of the French court, before its recognition of American independence was laid aside. He had the magpie habit of hoarding every scrap of paper or cardboard that bore the imprint of his existence, and Smith, the latest editor of Franklin's works, has, with his usual diligence, compiled the names that appear most frequently on the visiting cards found among Franklin's papers. They are such significant names as those of La Duchesse d'Anville, her son Le Duc de la Rochefoucauld, Monsieur Turgot, Duc de Chaulnes, Comte de Crillon, Vicomte de Sauffield, Monsieur Brisson of the Royal Academy of Sciences, Comte de Millet, Prince de Dupont, Comte d'Estaing, Marquis de Mirabeau, and Monsieur Beauregard, Treasurer of the State of Brittany. The diary of John Adams reveals Franklin and himself dining on one occasion with La Duchesse d'Anville and 20 of the great people of France, on another with Monsieur Chaloux, one of the farmers general, and the old Marshal Richelieu, and a vast number of other great company, on another with the Prince de Tingry, Duc de Beaumont, of the illustrious house of Montmorency, and on another with La Duchesse d'Anville, along with her daughter and granddaughter, and dukes and abbots, and the like, so numerous that the list ends with a splutter of et ceteras. Dukes and bishops and counts, etc., are the overburdened words with which Adams closes his list of the guests at a dinner given by Vergennes, the minister of Louis XVI. End of section 30. Section 31 of Benjamin Franklin, Self-Revealed, Volume 1, by William Bruce. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7, Part 2, Franklin's French Friends. But after all, it was the circle of intimate friends to which Franklin promised to introduce John Jay on the arrival of Jay in France that constitutes the chief interest of the former's social life in France. 3 of these friends were Madame Helvetius, Madame Brillon, and the Comtesse du Détaux. With Madame Helvetius he dined every Saturday at Auteuil, with Madame Brillon twice a week at the home of her husband, not far from his, and with the Comtesse du Détaux frequently at Saint-Ouen, in the valley of Montmorency. Madame Helvetius was known to her friends as Our Lady of Auteuil. She was the widow of Helvetius, the philosopher who had left her a handsome fortune amassed by him when one of the farmers general. In testimony of her affection for him, she kept under glass on a table in her bedroom a monument erected to his memory with his picture hung above it. Her salon was one of the best known in France, and it was maintained on such a sumptuous scale that in one of his letters after his return to America, Franklin told her that often in his dreams he placed himself by her side on one of her 1,000 sofas. It was at Auteuil that he passed some of his happiest hours in France, plying its mistress with flattery and badinage, and enjoying the music of her 2 daughters, known to the household as the Stars, and the conversation of her friends, the younger Cabanilles, and the Abbé Morellet and de la Roche. One of the amusements of the inner circle at Auteuil was to read aloud to each other little trifles, full of point and grace, which they had composed. Thus, though after Franklin had returned to America was ushered into the world the Abbé Morellet's very humble petition to Madame Helvetius from her cats, animals which appeared to have had a position in her home as assured as that of the Stars, or the abbés themselves, and several of the wittiest of the productions, which Franklin called his bagatelles, originated in the same way. If homage, seasoned with delightful humor and wit, could have kept the mistress of Auteuil at the age of 60 from incurring the malice of the female contemporary, who, we are told by Miss Adams, compared her with the ruins of Palmyra, that of Franklin would assuredly have done it. When she complained that he had not been to see her for a long time, he evaded the reproach of absence by replying, "I'm waiting, madame, until the nights are longer." Whatever others might think, she was to him his fair friend at Auteuil, who still possessed health and personal charms. What cleverer application could there be than this of the maxim of Hesiod, that the half is sometimes more than the whole? Very dear friend, we shall have some good music to-morrow morning at breakfast. Can you give me the pleasure of sharing in it? The time will be 10:30. This is a problem that a mathematician will experience some trouble in explaining. In sharing other things, each of us has only one portion, but in sharing pleasures with you, my portion is doubled. The part is more than the whole. On another occasion, when Madame Helvetius reminded Franklin that she expected to meet him at Turgot's, he replied, "Mr. Franklin never forgets any party at which Madame Helvetius is expected. He even believes that if he were engaged to go to Paradise this morning, he would pray for permission to remain on earth until 1:30 to receive the embrace promised him at the Turgot's." Poor Deborah seems altogether lost and forgotten when we read these lines that he wrote to the Abbé de la Roche. I've often remarked when reading the works of Monsieur Helvetius that although we were born and reared in 2 countries so remote from each other, we have frequently had the same thoughts, and it is a reflection very flattering to me that we have loved the same studies, and as far as we have both known them, the same friends and the same woman. But the image of Deborah was not so completely effaced from Franklin's memory that he could not conjure up her shade for a moment to excite a retaliatory impulse in the breast which he had found insensible to his proposals of marriage, serious or affected. If Madame Helvetius, who was illiterate like Deborah, did not appreciate the light aerial humor of the following dream from the pen of the author of The Art of Procuring Pleasant Dreams, we may be sure that her witty abbés did. Mortified by your cruel resolution, declared by you so positively yesterday evening, to remain single the rest of your life, out of respect for your dear husband, I retired to my home, threw myself upon my bed, and dreamt that I was dead and in the Elysian fields. I was asked whether I wished to see any persons in particular. "Conduct me to the philosophers," I replied. "There are 2 who live here close by in this garden. They are very good neighbors and very friendly with each other." I was told. "Who are they?" "Socrates and Helvetius." I esteem them both immensely, but let me see Helvetius first, because I understand a little French, but not a word of Greek. He received me with much courtesy, having known me, he said, by reputation for some time past. He asked me 1,000 questions about the war, the present state of religion, of liberty, and politics in France. You do not ask me, then, I said, anything about your dear amie, Madame Helvetius, yet she loves you still exceedingly, and I was at her home only an hour ago. Ah, said he, you bring back to me my past happiness, but it must be forgotten to be happy here. During several of my first years here, I thought only of her, but at length I am consoled. I have taken another wife, one as much like her as I could find. She is not, it is true, quite so handsome, but she has as much good sense and much esprit, and she loves me infinitely. Her continuous aim is to please me, and she is at this moment gone to look up the best nectar and ambrosia to regale me with this evening. Stay here a while, and you will see her. I perceive, said I, that your former amie is more faithful than you are, for she has had several good offers, but has refused them all. I confess that I myself have loved her to distraction, but she was obdurate, and has rejected me peremptorily for love of you. I pity your misfortunes, said he, for in truth she is a good and handsome woman, and very lovable. But are not the Abbé de la R and the Abbé M still sometimes at her house? Yes, to be sure, for she has not lost a single one of your friends. If you had induced the Abbé M with some good coffee and cream to say a word for you, you would perhaps have succeeded, for he is as subtle a reasoner as Duns Scotus or St. Thomas. He marshals his arguments in such good order that they become almost irresistible. And if the Abbé de la R had been induced by some fine edition of an old classic to say a word against you, that would have been better. For I have always observed that when he advised her to do anything, she had a very strong inclination to do the reverse. As he was saying this, the new Madame Helvetius entered with the nectar, and I recognized her instantly as my former American amie, Mrs. Franklin. I laid claim to her, but she said to me coldly, I was a good wife to you for 49 years and 4 months, almost a half century. Be content with that. I have formed a new connection here which will last to eternity. Indignant at this refusal of my Eurydice, I at once resolved to quit those ungrateful shades, and to return to this good world, and to gaze again upon the sun and you. Here I am. Let us avenge ourselves. It is an animated picture, too, that Franklin strikes off of Our Lady of Auteuil in a letter to Cabanilles, when the latter had been absent for a time from Auteuil. We often talk of you at Auteuil, where everybody loves you. I now and then offend our good lady, who cannot long retain her displeasure, but sitting in state on her sofa, extends graciously her long handsome arm, and says, La, bassez ma main, je vous pardonne, with all the dignity of a sultaness. She is as busy as ever, endeavoring to make every creature about her happy, from the abbés down through all ranks of the family to the birds and Poupon. Poupon was one of the fair lady's 18 cats. This letter ends with the request that Cabanilles present to his father the writer's thanks to him for having gotten so valuable a son. A lively note to Cabanilles is in the same vein. Monsieur Franklin, risen, washed, shaved, combed, beautified to the highest degree of which he is capable, entirely dressed and on the point of going out, with his head full of the 4 Mesdames Helvetius, and of the sweet kisses that he proposes to snatch from them, is much mortified to find the possibility of this happiness being put off until next Sunday. He will exercise as much patience as he can, hoping to see one of these ladies at the home of Monsieur de Chaumont Wednesday. He will be there in good time to see her enter with that grace and dignity which charmed him so much 7 weeks ago in the same place. He even plans to seize her there, and to keep her at his home for the rest of her life. His remaining 3 Mesdames Helvetius at Auteuil can suffice for the Canaries and the abbés. Another note to Cabanilles illustrates how readily pleasantry of this kind ran in the 18th century into gross license. Monsieur Franklin, is sorry to have caused the least hurt to those beautiful tresses that he always regards with pleasure. If that lady likes to pass her days with him, he would like as much to pass his nights with her. And since he has already given many of his days to her, although he had such a small remnant of them to give, she would seem ungrateful to have never given him a single one of her nights, which run continually to pure waste, without promoting the good fortune of any one except Poupon. When the reader is told that this letter ended with the words, "To be shown to Our Lady of Auteuil," his mind is not unprepared for the graphic description by Abigail Adams of a dinner at which Madame Helvetius was the central figure. She entered the room with a careless, jaunty air. Upon seeing ladies who were strangers to her, she bawled out, "Ah, mon Dieu, where is Franklin? Why did you not tell me there were ladies here?" You must suppose her speaking all this in French. "How I look!" said she, taking hold of a chemise made of Tiffany, which she had on over a blue lutestring, and which looked as much upon the decay as her beauty, for she was once a handsome woman. Her hair was frizzled. Over it she had a small straw hat, with a dirty gauze half-handkerchief round it, and a bit of dirtier gauze than ever my maids wore was bowed on behind. She had a black gauze scarf thrown over her shoulders. She ran out of the room. When she returned, the doctor entered at one door and she at the other, upon which she ran forward to him and caught him by the hand. Hélas! Franklin then gave him a double kiss, one upon each cheek and another upon his forehead. When he went into the room to dine, she was placed between the doctor and Mr. Adams. She carried on the chief of the conversation at dinner, frequently locking her hands into the doctor's and sometimes spreading her arms upon the backs of both the gentlemen's chairs, then throwing her arm carelessly upon the doctor's neck. I should have been greatly astonished at this conduct if the good doctor had not told me that in this lady I should see a genuine French woman, wholly free from affectation or stiffness of behavior, and one of the best women in the world. For this I must take the doctor's word, but I should have set her down for a very bad one, although 60 years of age and a widow. I own I was highly disgusted, and never wished for an acquaintance with any ladies of this cast. After dinner she threw herself upon a settee, where she showed more than her feet. She had a little lap-dog, who was next to the doctor her favourite. This she kissed, and when he wet the floor she wiped it up with her chemise. This is one of the doctor's most intimate friends, with whom he dines once every week, and she with him. She is rich and is my near neighbour, but I have not yet visited her. Thus you see, my dear, that manners differ exceedingly in different countries. I hope, however, to find among the French ladies manners more consistent with my ideas of decency, or I shall be a mere recluse. This, of course, in part, was but the New England snowdrop expressing its disapproval of the full-blown red rose of France, but it is impossible for all the pigments in the picture painted by the skilful hand of Abigail Adams to have been supplied by the moral austerity of Puritanism. Miss Adams, we might add, followed up her mother's impression with a prim ditto in her journal. Dined at Mr. Franklin's by invitation, a number of gentlemen, and Madame Helvetius, a French lady 60 years of age. Odious indeed do our sex appear when divested of their ornaments with which modesty and delicacy adorn us. But we must suspect that the doctor was right in saying that Madame Helvetius, free and tawdry as she seemed to Abigail Adams and her daughter, was one of the best women in the world, that is to say, her world. We are told that when she was convalescing from an illness, 400 persons assembled at Auteuil to express the pleasure they felt at the prospect of her recovery. Beneath the noisy, lax manners which Mrs. Adams delineates so mercilessly, there must have been another and a very different Madame Helvetius to have won such a tribute as the following from a man who had known what it was to be tenderly beloved by more than one pure, thoroughly refined, and accomplished woman. And now I mention your friends, let me tell you that I have in my way been trying to form some hypothesis to account for your having so many, and of such various kinds. I see that statesmen, philosophers, historians, poets, and men of learning of all sorts are drawn around you, and seem as willing to attach themselves to you as straws about a fine piece of amber. It is not that you make pretensions to any of their sciences, and if you did, similarity of studies does not always make people love one another. It is not that you take pains to engage them. Artless simplicity is a striking part of your character. I would not attempt to explain it by the story of the ancient, who being asked by why philosophers sought the acquaintance of kings, and kings not that of philosophers, replied that philosophers knew what they wanted, which was not always the case with kings. Yet thus far the comparison may go, that we find in your sweet society that charming benevolence, that amiable attention to oblige, that disposition to please and be pleased, which we do not always find in the society of one another. It springs from you, it has its influence on us all, and in your company we are not only pleased with you, but better pleased with one another and ourselves. There can be no doubt that the friendship between the two was a real, genuine sentiment. When Franklin was doubting whether he was not too old and decrepit to cross the Atlantic, she was one of the three friends who urged him to spend his last days in France and live with them. It was hardly fair, therefore, when she exclaimed after the departure of Franklin from France, in the presence of Madame Brillon, "Ah, that great man, that dear man, we shall see him no more." For Madame Brillon to retort, "It is entirely your fault, Madame." From Havre he sent back tender farewells to his très cher ami. They were awaiting, he said, their baggage and fellow voyager, Mr. Houdon, the sculptor. "When they come, we shall quit France, the country of the world that I love the best, and I shall leave there my dear Helvetia. She can be happy there. I am not sure of being happy in America, but it is necessary for me to go there. Things seem to me to be badly arranged here below, when I see, being so well constituted to be happy together, compelled to separate." Then, after a message of friendship to the abbés, the good abbés, the veil dies out in these fond words: "I do not tell you that I love you. I might be told that there was nothing strange or meritorious in that, because the whole world loves you. I only hope that you will always love me a little." Nor did the separation worked by the Atlantic produce any change in these feelings. In the letters written by Franklin to Madame Helvetius and the members of her circle after his return to Philadelphia, there is the same spirit of affection for her and for them, as well as a wistful retrospect of his chats with her on her thousand sofas, his walks with her in her garden, and the repasts at her table, always seasoned by sound sense, sprightliness, and friendship. One of his commissions seems to have been to obtain a cardinal red bird for the good dame, as he calls her in a letter to the Abbé Morellet from Philadelphia. The good dame whom we all love, and whose memory I shall love and honor as long as I have any existence, were his words. But the commission was difficult of execution. The Virginia cardinal, he wrote to the abbé, was a tender bird that stood the sea but poorly. Several sent out to France for their dame by Mr. Alexander in his tobacco ships had never arrived, he understood, and unless a friend was going in the ship who would take more than common care of them, he supposed one might send an 100 without landing one alive. "They would be very happy, I know," he said, "if they were once under her protection, but they cannot come to her, and she will not come to them. She may remember the offer I made her of 1,000 acres of woodland, out of which she might cut a great garden and have 1,000 aviaries, if she pleased. I have a large tract on the Ohio, where cardinals are plenty. If I had been a cardinal myself, perhaps I might have prevailed with her." In his efforts to transport the cardinal, Franklin even enlisted the services of Mr. Paradise, who, if contemporary gossip is reliable, might well have pleaded the preoccupation imposed upon him of protecting himself from the beak of his own termagant wife. Madame Helvetius, however, was not so eager for a cardinal as not to be willing to wait until one could be brought over by a proper escort. "I'm in no hurry at all," she wrote to Franklin. "I will wait, for I am not willing to be the death of these pretty creatures. I will wait." In this same letter there is an amusing mixture of tenderness and banter. Declining health and advancing years, she said, would but enable them to sooner to meet again, as well as to meet again those whom they had loved, she a husband and he a wife. But I believe," she wipes the moisture from her eyes long enough to say, "that you who have been a rogue, coquin, will be restored to more than one." From what we have said, it is plain enough that the friendship felt by Madame Helvetius for the Abbés Morellet and de la Roche was shared by Franklin. When he touched at Southampton after leaving Havre on his return to America, he wafted another fond farewell to Madame Helvetius. "I will always love you," he said. "Think of me sometimes, and write sometimes to your B.F." This letter, too, contained the usual waggish references to the Abbés. "Adieu, my very, very, very dear ami. Wish us a good voyage, and tell the good Abbés to pray for us, since that is their profession." The very humble petition to Madame Helvetius from her cats was long ascribed to Franklin, but it was really written by the Abbé Morellet. After reading it, Franklin wrote to the abbé that the rapidity with which the good lady's 18 cats were increasing would in time make their cause insupportable, and that their friends should therefore advise them to submit voluntarily either to transportation or castration. How deeply the Abbé Morellet was attached to Franklin is feelingly revealed in the letters which he wrote to him after the latter had arrived safely in America, to say nothing of the abbé's memoirs. "May your days," he wrote in one of these letters, "be prolonged and be free from pain. May your friends long taste the sweetness and the charm of your society, and may those whom the seas have separated from you be still happy in the thought that the end of your career will be, as our good La Fontaine says, the evening of a fine day." Then, after some political reflections suggested by the liberal institutions of America, the abbé indulges in a series of gay comments on the habit that their Lady of Auteuil had, in her excessive love of coffee, of robbing him of his share of the cream, on the vicious bulldog brought over by Temple to France from England, and on the host of cats that had multiplied in the wood-house and the wood-yard at Auteuil under the patronage of their mistress, and did nothing but keep their paws in their furred gowns and warm themselves in the sun. Friends of liberty, these cats, the abbé said, were entirely out of place under the governments of Europe. Nothing could be more suitable than to load a small vessel with them and ship them to America. Another letter from the abbé concluded with these heartfelt words: "I shall never forget the happiness I've enjoyed in knowing you and seeing you intimately. I write to you from Auteuil, seated in your armchair, on which I have engraved Benjamin Franklin hic Cedibat, and having by my side the little bureau which you bequeathed to me at parting, with a drawer full of nails to gratify the love of nailing and hammering, which I possess in common with you. But believe me, I have no need of all these helps to cherish your endeared remembrance and to love you. Dum memor ipsi mei, dum spiritus hos reget artis." During their jolly intercourse in France, the Abbé Morellet and Franklin touched glasses in two highly convivial productions. On one of the anniversaries of the birth of Franklin, or of American liberty, the Abbé could not remember which, the Abbé composed a drinking song in honor of Franklin, and among the letters written by Franklin when he was in France was one to the Abbé, in which wine is lauded in terms of humorous exaggeration. One of the verses of the Abbé's production refers to the American War, and has been translated in these words by Parton: "Never did mankind engage in a war with views more sage. They seek freedom with design, to drink plenty of French wine. Such has been the intent of Benjamin." The other verses are no better and no worse, and the whole poem is even more inferior in wit to Franklin's letter to the abbé than the very humble petition to Madame Helvetius from her cats, clever though it be, is to Franklin's journey to the Elysian fields. If we had nothing but these bibulous productions to judge by, we might infer that love of wine, quite as much as love of Madame Helvetius, was the tie of connection between the Abbé Morellet and Franklin. Indeed, in the letter to Franklin with respect to the cats, the abbé was quite as candid about expressing his partiality for one form of spirits as Franklin was in his unblushing eulogy of wine. He did not know, he said, what duties his cats in the unsettled condition of the commercial relations between France and the United States would be made to pay on arriving at Philadelphia. And then, he continued, if my vessel should find nothing to load with among you but grain, it could not touch at our islands to take in sugar, or to bring me back good rum either, which I love much. When the Abbé de la Roche made a gift to Franklin of a volume of vivacious poems, Franklin was quick to give him a recompense in the form of a little drinking song which he had composed some 40 years before. The plan of this poem is for the chorus, whenever the singer dwells upon any other source of gratification, to insist so vociferously upon friends and a bottle as the highest, as to finally, so to speak, drown the singer out. Thus, singer, fair Venus calls, her voice obey, in beauty's arms spend night and day. The joys of love all joys excel, and loving's certainly doing well. Chorus, oh no, not so, for honest souls know, friends and a bottle still bear the bell. In a letter to William Carmichael, enclosing his brilliant little bagatelle, the Ephemera, Franklin described Madame Brillon in these terms. The person to whom it was addressed is Madame Brillon, a lady of most respectable character and pleasing conversation, mistress of an amiable family in this neighborhood, with which I spend an evening twice in every week. She has, among other elegant accomplishments, that of an excellent musician, and with her daughters who sing prettily, and some friends who play, she kindly entertains me and my grandson with little concerts, a cup of tea, and a game of chess. I call this my opera, for I rarely go to the opera at Paris. Madame Brillon was the wife of a public functionary much older than herself, who yet, as her own letters to Franklin divulged, did not feel that strict fidelity to her was necessary to soften the difference in their ages. My father, she wrote on one occasion to Franklin, marriage in this country is made by weight of gold. On one end of the scale is placed the fortune of a boy, on the other that of a girl. When equality is found, the affair is ended to the satisfaction of the relatives. One does not dream of consulting taste, age, congeniality of character. One marries a young girl whose heart is full of youth's fire and its cravings to a man who has used them up. Then one exacts that this woman be virtuous. My friend, this story is mine, and of how many others. I shall do my best that it may not be that of my daughters, but alas, shall I be mistress of their fate. The correspondence between Madame Brillon and Franklin was very voluminous. Among the Franklin papers in the possession of the American Philosophical Society, there are no less than 119 letters from her to him, and in the same collection there are also the rough drafts of some of his letters in French to her. More than one of them are marked with corrections by her hand. Repeated statements of hers show that she took a very indulgent view of his imperfect mastery of the French language. When he sent to the Brillon his French translation of his dialogue between the gout and Monsieur Franklin, she returned it to him corrected and made worse in several particulars by a savant, and devoted to destruction by the critical notes of a woman who is no savant, and she took occasion at the same time to say, your dialogue has greatly amused me, but your corrector of French has spoiled your work. Believe me, leave your productions as they are. Use words which mean something, and laugh at the grammarians who enfeeble all your phrases with their purisms. If I had the brains, I should utter a diatribe against those who dare to touch you up, even if it were the Abbé de la Roche or my neighbor Vaillard. After reading the whistle of Franklin, she wrote to him, Monsieur Brillon has laughed heartily over the whistle. We find that what you call your bad French often gives a piquant flavor to your narrative by reason of a certain turn of phraseology and the words you invent. It may well be doubted whether there is anything more brilliant in literary history than the letters which make up the correspondence between Madame Brillon and Franklin, and the marvel is that the intellectual quality of his letters should in every respect be as distinctly French as that of hers. His easy, fleeting touch, his unflagging vivacity, his wit, his fertility of invention, his amative coloring, are all as thoroughly French as Bourbon or Champagne. The tame domesticity of his 49 years of sober American wedlock, the calm, well-regulated flow of his thoughts and habits in conservative England, under the roof of Mrs. Stevenson, and at the country seat of the good bishop, the philosophy of poor Richard, the art of virtue, are exchanged for a character which, except when a suitable match was to be found for Monsieur Franklinet, as Madame Brillon called William Temple Franklin, apparently took no account of anything but the pursuit of pleasure, as pleasure was pursued by the people, who have of all others most nearly succeeded in giving to it the rank of a respectable divinity. In all the letters of Franklin to Madame Brillon there is not a sentiment with a characteristic American or English inflection in it. How far his approaches to the beautiful and clever wife of Monsieur Brillon were truly erotic, and how far merely the conventional courtship of a gifted but aged man, who had survived everything that belongs to passion, but its language it is impossible to say. We only know that if his gallantry was specious merely, he maintained it with a degree of pertinacity which there is only too much reason to believe might have had a different issue if it had been more youthful and genuine. A handsome, talented Frenchwoman of the 18th century, burdened with a faithless husband, not too old for the importunity of a heart full, to use her own expression of youth's fire and cravings, and tolerant enough to sit on an admirer's knees and to write responsive replies to letters from him, accompanied by a perpetual refrain of sexuality, would, to say the least, have been in considerable danger of forgetting her marriage vows, if her Colin had been younger. As it was, the tenderness of Madame Brillon for her cher papa appears to have produced no results worse than a series of letters from her pen, as finished as enamel, which show that in every form of defensive warfare, literary or amorous, she was quite a match for the great man, who was disposed to forget how long he had lingered in a world which has nothing but a laugh for the efforts of December to pass itself off as May. "Do you know, my dear papa," she wrote to him on one occasion, "that people have criticized my pleasant habit of sitting on your lap, and yours of asking me for what I always refuse. In this world," she assured him, "she would always be a gentle and virtuous woman, and the most that she would promise was to be his wife in paradise, if he did not ogle the maidens there too much while waiting for her." End of section 31. Section 32 of Benjamin Franklin, Self-Revealed, Volume 1, by William Bruce. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7, Part 3, Franklin's French Friends. When the hearty resolution is once formed of reviewing the correspondence between Franklin and Madame Brillon, the most difficult task is that of compression. "What," she wrote to Monsieur Papa from Nice after the capitulation of Cornwallis, "you capture entire armies in America, you bourgeoisie Cornwallis, you take cannon, vessels, munitions of war, men, horses, etc., etc. You capture everything, and from everybody, and the Gazette alone brings it to the knowledge of your friends, who befuddle themselves with drinking to your health, to that of Washington, of independence, of the King of France, of the Marquis de Lafayette, of the Mrs. de Rochambeau, Chalalux, etc., etc., where you do not exhibit a sign of life to them. Yet you should be a bon vivant at this time, although you rarely err in that respect, and you are surely 20 years younger because of this good news, which ought to bring us a lasting peace after a glorious war." To this letter Franklin replied on Christmas Day of the year 1781, the birthday of the Dauphin of Heaven, he called it in the letter. He was very sensible, he said, to the greatness of their victory, but war was full of vicissitudes and uncertainty, and he played his game with the same evenness of temper that she had seen him bring to the good and bad turns of a game of chess. That was why he had said so little of the surrender, and had only remarked that nothing could make him perfectly happy under certain circumstances. The point, of course, was that still another capitulation was essential to his happiness. He then proceeds to tell Madame Brillon that everywhere from Paris to Versailles every one spoke of her with respect, and some with affection and even admiration, which was music to his ears. Often pass before your house, he adds. It wears a desolate look to me. Heretofore I have broken the commandment in coveting it along with my neighbor's wife. Now I do not covet it. Thus I am the less a sinner. But with regard to the wife, I always find these commandments very inconvenient, and I am sorry that we are cautioned to practice them. Should you find yourself in your travels at the home of St. Peter, ask him to recall them, as intended only for the Jews, and as too irksome for good Christians. These specimens are true to the language of the entire correspondence, but further excerpts from it will not be amiss, for the purpose of enabling us to realize how agreeable the flirtation between the two must have been to have produced such a lengthy correspondence, despite the fact that Franklin visited Madame Brillon at least every Wednesday and Saturday. On November 2, 1778, she wrote to Franklin as follows: "The hope that I had of seeing you here, my dear papa, has kept me from writing to you for Saturday's tea. Hope is the remedy for all our ills. If one suffers, one hopes for the end of the trouble. If one is with friends, one hopes to remain with them always. If one is away from them, one hopes to rejoin them. And this is the only hope that is left to me. I shall count the days, the hours, the moments. Each moment gone brings me nearer to you. We like to grow older when it is the only means of reuniting us to those whom we love. The person who takes life thus seeks unceasingly to shorten it. He plans, desires. Without the future, it seems to him that he has nothing. When my children are grown up, in 10 years, the trees in my garden will shade me. The years slip by, then one regrets them. I might have done such and such a thing, one says then. Had I not been only 25 years old, I should not have done the foolish thing of which I now repent. The wise man alone enjoys the present, does not regret the past, and awaits peacefully the future. The wise man who, like you, my papa, has passed his youth in acquiring knowledge and enlightening his fellow men, and his mature years in obtaining liberty for them, brings a complacent eye to bear on the past, enjoys the present, and awaits the reward of his labors in the future. But how many are wise? I try to become so, and am so in some respects. I take no account of wealth. Vanity has little hold upon my heart. I like to do my duty. I freely forgive society its errors and injustices, but I love my friends with an idolatry that often does me much harm. A prodigious imagination, a soul of fire, will always get the better of all my plans and thoughts. I see, papa, that I must never lay claim to any but the one perfection of loving the most that is possible. May this quality make you love your daughter always. Come, you always know how to combine a great measure of wisdom with a touch of roguishness. You ask Brillon for news of me at the very moment when you are receiving a letter from me. You play the part of the neglected one, just when you are being spoiled, and then you deny it, like a madman when the secret is discovered. Oh, I have news of you. Mamma, my children, and Mademoiselle Jupin present their respects to you. May I venture to beg you to give my kind regards to Mr. Franklin A. Another letter in the same vein from Madame Brillon to Franklin bears date May 11, 1779. You are quite right, my good papa. We should find true happiness only in peace of mind. It is not in our power to change the nature of those with whom we live, nor to check the course of the contradictions that surround us. It is a wise man who speaks and who tries to comfort his too sensitive daughter by telling her the truth. Oh, my father, I beseech your friendship, your healthy philosophy. My heart hears you and is submissive to you. Give me strength to take the place of an indifference that your child can never feel. But admit, my friend, that for one who knows how to love, ingratitude is a frightful misfortune. that it is hard for a woman who would give her life without hesitation to ensure her husband's happiness, to see the results of her exertions and her longings wiped out by intrigue and falsity. Time will make everything right. My papa has said so, and I believe it. But my papa has also said that time is the stuff that life is made of. My life, my friend, is made of a fine and thin stuff that grief rends cruelly. If I had anything to reproach myself with, I should long have ceased to exist. My soul is pure, simple, frank. I dare to tell my papa so. I dare to tell him that it is worthy of him. I dare still to assure him that my conduct, which he has deemed wise, will not belie itself, that I shall await justice with patience, that I shall follow the advice of my worthy friend with steadiness and confidence. Adieu, you whom I love so much, my kind papa. Never call me anything but my daughter. Yesterday you called me madame, and my heart shrank. I examined myself to see whether I had done you any wrong, or if I had some failings that you would not tell me of. Pardon, my friend, I'm not visiting you with a reproach. I'm accusing myself of a weakness. I was born much too sensitive for my happiness and for that of my friends. Cure me or pity me if you can. Do one or the other. Tomorrow, Wednesday, you will come to tea, will you not? Believe me, my papa, that the pleasure I feel in receiving you is shared by my husband, my children, and my friends. I cannot doubt it, and I assure you of it. Franklin's reply to this letter is for a brief moment that of a real father rather than Monsieur Papa. This reminds us that in one of her letters to him, she states that in her own father she had lost her first and best friend, and recalls the fact that Franklin had told her of the custom of certain savages who adopt the prisoners that they capture in war and make them take the place of the relations whom they have lost. In answer to her statement that ingratitude is a frightful misfortune, he says, that is true to ingrates, but not to their benefactors. You have conferred benefits on those that you have believed worthy of them. You have therefore done your duty, as it is a part of our duty to be kindly, and you ought to be satisfied with that and happy in the reflection. This was followed by the advice to his very dear and always lovable daughter to continue to fulfill all her duties as a good mother, a good wife, a good friend, a good neighbor, a good Christian, etc. We shall see a little later on what he deemed a part of the duty of a good charitable Christian to be. The letter terminates with an apology for his bad French. It may, he said, disgust you, you who write that charming language with so much purity and elegance, but if you can in the end decipher my awkward and improper expressions, you will at least perhaps experience the kind of pleasure that we find in solving enigmas or discovering secrets. His letter transmitting his dialogue with the gout to Madame Brillon was not so decorous. It was in it that he had a word to say about the other kind of Christian conduct that he was in the habit of enjoining upon her. A part of this letter was the following. One of the characters in your story, namely the gout, appeared to me to reason well enough, with the exception of his supposition that mistresses have had something to do with producing this painful malady. I myself believe the entire contrary, and this is my method of reasoning. When I was a young man and enjoyed the favors of the sex more freely than at present, I had no gout. Therefore, if the ladies of Passy had had more of that kind of Christian charity that I have often recommended to you in vain, I would not have the gout at present. This seems to me to be good logic. I am much better. I suffer little pain, but I am very feeble. I can, as you see, joke a little, but I cannot be really gay before I hear that your precious health is reestablished. I send you my dialogue in the hope that it may amuse you at times. Many thanks for the 3 last volumes of Montaigne that I return. The visit of your ever lovable family yesterday evening has done me much good. My God, how I love them all, from the grandmother and the father to the smallest child. The reply of Madame Brillon was in kindred terms. Saturday, 18th November, 1780. There would be many little things indeed to criticize in your logic, which you fortify so well, my dear papa. When I was a young man, you say, and enjoyed the favours of the sex more freely than at present, I had no gout. Therefore one might reply to this, when I threw myself out of the window, I did not break my leg. Therefore you could have the gout without having deserved it, and you could have well deserved it, as I believe, and not have had it. If this last argument is not so brilliant as the others, it is clear and sure. What is neither clear nor sure are the arguments of philosophers who insist that everything that happens in the world is necessary to the general movement of the universal machine. I believe that the machine would go neither better nor worse if you did not have the gout, and if I were forever rid of my nervous troubles. I do not see what help, more or less, these little incidents can give to the wheels that turn this world at random, and I know that my little machine goes very much the worse for them. What I know very well, besides, is that pain sometimes becomes mistress of reason, and that patience alone can overcome these two nuisances. I have as much of it as I can, and advise you, my friend, to have the same amount. When frosts have cast a gloom over the earth, a bright sun makes us forget them. We are in the midst of frosts, and must wait patiently for this bright sun, and while waiting for it, amuse ourselves in the moments when weakness and pain leave us some rest. This, my dear papa, is my logic. Adieu, my good papa. My big husband will take my letter to you. He is very happy to be able to go to see you. For me nothing remains but the faculty of loving my friends. You surely do not doubt that I shall do my best for you, even to Christian charity, that is to say, with the exception of your Christian charity. She writes a brief letter to Franklin on New Year's Day of 1781. If I had a good head and good legs, if, in short, I had everything that I lack, I should have come like a good daughter to wish a happy New Year to the best of papas. But I have only a very tender heart to love him well, and a rather bad pen to scribble him that this year as well as last year, and all the years of my life, I shall love him, myself alone, as much as all the others that love him put together. Briand and the children present their respects to the kind papa, and we also send 1,000 messages for Monsieur Franklinet. Some 4 years later, after Franklin had vainly endeavored to marry Temple Franklin to a daughter of Madame Briand, we find him writing a letter of congratulation to her upon the happy accouchement of her daughter. It elicits a reply in which the cheek of the beautiful and benignant nature of which she speaks undergoes a considerable amount of artificial coloring. 2nd December, 1784. Your letter, my kind papa, has given me keen pleasure, but if you would give me still more, remain in France until you see my 6th generation. I only ask you for 15 or 16 years. My granddaughter will be marriageable early. She is fair and strong. I am tasting a new feeling, my good papa, to which my heart surrenders itself with pleasure. It is so sweet to love. I've never been able to conceive how beings exist who are such enemies to themselves as to reject friendship. They are ingrates, we say. Well, we are deceived. That is a little hard sometimes, but we are not always so, and to feel oneself incapable of returning the treachery affords a satisfaction of itself that consoles us for it. My little nurse is charming and fresh as a morning rose. The first days the child had difficulty, but patience and the mother's courage overcame it. All goes well now, and nothing could be more interesting than this picture of a young and pretty person nursing a superb child, the father uninterruptedly occupied with the spectacle and joining his attentions to those of his wife. My eyes are unceasingly moist, and my heart rejoices, my kind papa. You realize so well the value of all that belongs to beautiful and benignant nature that I owe you these details. My daughter charges me with her thanks and compliments to you. Ma Cadette and my men present their regards, and as for me, my friend, I beg you to believe that my friendship and my existence will always be one as respects you. Once Franklin sought to corner Madame Brillon with a story which makes us feel for a moment as if the rod of transformation was beginning to work a backward spell, and the Benjamin Franklin of Craven Street and Independence Hall to be released from the spell of the French Circe. To make you better realize the force of my demonstration that you do not love me, I commence with a little story. A beggar asked a rich bishop for a louis by way of alms. You are wild. No one gives a louis to a beggar. An écu, then? No, that is too much. A liard, then, or your benediction. My benediction, yes, I will give it to you. No, I will not accept it, for if it was worth a liard, you would not be willing to give it to me. That was how this bishop loved his neighbor. That was his charity, and were I to scrutinize yours, I would not find it much greater. I am incredibly hungry for it, and you have given me nothing to eat. I was a stranger, and I was almost as lovesick as Colin when you were singing, and you have neither taken me in, nor cured me, nor eased me. You who are as rich as an archbishop in all the Christian and moral virtues, and could sacrifice a small share of some of them without visible loss, you tell me that it is asking too much, and that you are not willing to do it. That is your charity to a poor wretch who once enjoyed affluence and is unfortunately reduced to soliciting alms. Nevertheless, you say you love him, but you would not give him your friendship if it involved the expenditure of the least little morsel of the value of a liard, of your wisdom. But see how nimbly the coquette eludes her pursuer. My dear papa, your bishop was a niggard, and your beggar a queer enough fellow. You are a logician, all the cleverer because you argue in a charming way, and almost awaken an inclination to yield to your unsound arguments, founded on a false principle. Is it of Dr. Franklin, the celebrated philosopher, the profound statesman, that a woman speaks with so much irreverence? Yes, this erudite man, this legislator, has his infirmities. It is the weakness, moreover, of great men. He has taken full advantage of it. But let us go into the matter. To prove that I do not love you, my good papa, you compare yourself to a beggar who asked alms from a bishop. Now the role of a bishop is not to refuse to give to beggars when they are really in want. He honors himself in doing good. But in truth the kind of charity which you ask of me so amusingly can be found everywhere. You will not grow thin because of my refusals. What would you think of your beggar if the bishop, having given him the louis which he asked, he had grumbled because he did not get two? That, however, is your case, my good friend. You adopted me as your daughter. I chose you for my father. What do you expect of me? Friendship. Well, I love you as a daughter should love her father. The purest, the most respectful, the tenderest affection for you fills my soul. You asked me for a louis, I gave it to you, and yet you murmur at not getting another one, which does not belong to me. It is a treasure which has been entrusted to me, my good papa. I guard it and will always guard it carefully. Even if you were like Colin, sick, in truth I could not cure you, and nevertheless, whatever you may think or say, no one in this world loves you more than I. In this letter she puts him off with the teasing assurance of friendship. In another, written from Marseilles, it is with other charming women that she mocks him. I received my arrival here, my good papa, your letter of October 1st. It has given me keen pleasure. I found in it evidences of your friendship and a tinge of that gaiety and gallantry which make all women love you, because you love them all. Your proposition to carry me on your wings, if you were the angel Gabriel, made me laugh, but I would not accept it, although I am no longer very young nor a virgin. That angel was a sly fellow, and your nature united to his would become too dangerous. I should be afraid of miracles happening, and miracles between women and angels might well not always bring a redeemer. I've arranged, my good friend, to write alternately to my great neighbor and to you. The one to whom I shall not have written will kindly tell the other that I love him with all my heart, and when your turn comes you will add an embrace for the good wife of our neighbor, for her daughter, for little Mother Caillot, for all the gentle and pretty women of my acquaintance whom you may meet. You see that not being able to amuse you, either by my singing or by chess, I seek to procure you other pleasures. If you had been at Avignon, With us it is there you would have wished to embrace people. The women there are charming. I thought of you every time I saw one of them. Adieu, my good papa. I do not relate to you the details of my journey, as I have written of them to our neighbor who will communicate them to you. I limit myself to assuring you of the most constant and the tenderest friendship on my part. At times the pursuer is too badly afflicted with gout in his legs to maintain the pursuit, and the pursued has to come to his assistance to keep the flirtation going. How are you, my good papa? Never has it cost me so much to leave you. Every evening it seems to me that you would be very glad to see me, and every evening I think of you. On Monday the 21st I shall go to meet you again. I hope that you will then be very firm on your feet, and at the teas of Wednesday and Saturday and that of Sunday morning will regain all their brilliance. I will bring you a la bonne évêque. My fat husband will make you laugh. Our children will laugh together. Our great neighbor will quiz. The abbés Laroche and Morellet will eat all the butter. Madame Grand, her amiable niece, and Monsieur Grand will help the company out. Père Pagin will play God of Love on his violin, I the march on the piano, and you, Petit Soiseau, on the harmonica. Oh, my friend, let us see in the future fine and strong legs for you, and think no more of the bad one that has persecuted you so much. After what is bad, one enjoys what is good more. Life is sown with both, which she changes unceasingly. What she cannot keep from being equal and uniform is my tenderness for you, that time, place, and events will never alter. My mother and all my family wish to be remembered to you. I've had some news of you through our neighbor, but I must absolutely have some from you. Amusingly enough, Monsieur Briand contributes his part to the restoration of the gouty legs to something like normal activity. The visits of your good husband during my sickness, wrote Franklin to Madame Briand, have been very agreeable to me. His conversation has eased and enlivened me. I regret that instead of seeking it when I have been at your home, I've lost so much time in playing chess. He has many stories and always applies them well. If he has despoiled you of some, you can repeat them all the same, for they will always please me, coming from your mouth. There is another letter from Madame Briand to Franklin, which drew a reply from him, in which he ascended into the Christian heaven with almost as much literary facility as marked his entrance into the pagan Elysium. Her letter was written during an absence from home. Here I am, reduced to writing to you, my good papa, and to telling you that I love you. I was sweeter, no doubt, to let you see it in my eyes. How am I going to spend the Wednesdays and Saturdays? No teas, no chess, no music, no hope of seeing or embracing my good papa. It seems to me that the privation which I experience from your absence would suffice to make me change my views, were I inclined to materialism. Happiness is so uncertain, so full of crosses, that the deep conviction that we shall be happier in another life can alone tide us over the trials of this one. In paradise we shall be reunited, never to leave each other again. We shall there live on roasted apples only. The music will be made up of Scotch airs. All parties will be given over to chess, so that no one may be disappointed. Every one will speak the same language. The English will be neither unjust nor wicked there. The women will not be coquettes, the men will be neither jealous nor too gallant. King John will be left to eat his apples in peace. Perhaps he will be decent enough to offer some to his neighbors. Who knows, since we shall want for nothing in paradise. We shall never suffer from gout or nervous troubles there. Mr. Mesmer will content himself with playing on the harmonica without wearying us with the electric fluid. Ambition, envy, snobbery, jealousy, prejudice, all these will vanish at the sound of the trumpet. A lasting, sweet, and peaceful friendship will animate every gathering. Every day we shall love one another, in order that we may love one another still more the day after. In a word, we shall be completely happy. In the meantime, let us get all the good we can out of this poor world of ours. I'm far from you, my good papa. I look forward to the time of our meeting, and I'm pleased to think that your regrets and desires equal mine. My mother and my children send you 1,000 tender messages of respect. We should all like to have you here. May I venture to ask you to remember us to your grandson? And this was the deft reply of Franklin, which has come down to us in French, corrected by Madame Briand's hand. Since you have assured me that we shall meet each other again and shall recognize each other in paradise, I have reflected continually on our arrangements in that country, for I have great confidence in your assurances, and I believe implicitly what you believe. Probably more than 40 years will pass away after my arrival there before you will follow me. I fear a little that in the course of such a long time you may forget me. That is why I have had thoughts of proposing to you that you give me your word that you will not renew your contract with Monsieur Briand. I would give you mine at the same time to wait for you, but this monsieur is so good, so generous to us. He loves you, and we him, so well that I cannot think of this proposition without some scruples of conscience. However, the idea of an eternity in which I should not be more favored than to be allowed to kiss your hands or your cheeks occasionally, and to pass 2 or 3 hours in your sweet society at Wednesday and Saturday evening parties, is frightful. In fine, I cannot make that proposal, but since, like all who know you, I desire to see you happy in every respect, we may agree to say nothing more about it at this time, and to leave you at liberty to decide when we are all together again. There to determine the question as you deem best for your happiness and ours, but determine it as you will, I feel that I shall love you eternally. Should you reject me, perhaps I shall pay my addresses to Madame d'Ardencourt, the mother of Madame Briand, who might be glad to keep house for me. In that event I should pass my domestic hours agreeably with her, and I should be better prepared to see you. I should have enough time in those 40 years there to practice on the harmonica, and perhaps I should play well enough to be worthy to accompany your pianoforte. We should have little concerts from time to time. Good Father Pagin would be of the company, your neighbor and his dear family, Monsieur Jupin, Monsieur de Chaumont, Monsieur B, Monsieur Jourdan, Monsieur Gramont, Madame du Tartre, the little mother, and some other select friends will be our audience, and the dear good girls, accompanied by some other young angels, whose portraits you have already given me, will sing hallelujahs with us. We shall eat together apples of paradise, roasted with butter and nutmeg, and we shall pity them who are not dead. In another letter he complains that she shuts him out from everything except a few civil and polite kisses, such as she might give to some of her small cousins. All this, however, was but preliminary to the treaty which the signer of the Treaty of Alliance between France and the United States formally submitted to her in this letter. Among the articles of this treaty were to be these: Article 6, and the said Mr. F. on his part stipulates and covenants that he is to call at the home of Madame B. as often as he pleases. Article 7, that he is to remain there as long as he pleases. Article 8, and that when he is with her he is to do what he pleases. He did not have much hope, he said, of obtaining her consent to the 8th article. In another letter the aged lover tells Madame Briand that she must not accuse others of being responsible for his having left her half an hour sooner than usual. The truth was that he was very much fatigued for special reasons that he mentions, and thought it more decent to leave her than to fall asleep, which he was beginning to do on a bench in her garden after her descent into it. After all, a half hour with an old man who could not make the best use of it was a thing of very little importance. Saturday evening he would remain with her until she wished him to go, and in spite of her usual polite phrases he would know the time by her refusal to give him a little kiss. With another note he sent to Madame Briand his essay on the morals of chess. It was only proper that it should be dedicated to her, he said, as its good advice was copied from her generous and magnanimous way of playing the game. In the same letter he stated that his grandson had inspected the house that she had urged him to apply for, but true still to his adopted character, he said, he finds it too magnificent for simple republicans. In another letter he told Madame Briand that he loved to live, because it seemed to him that there was much more pleasure than pain in existence. We should not blame Providence rashly. She should reflect how many even of our duties it had made pleasures, and that it had been good enough, moreover, to call several pleasures sins to enhance our enjoyment of them. One more letter from Madame Briand, and we shall let her retire from the chessboard with the credit of having proved herself fully a match for Franklin in the longest and most absorbing game of chess that he played in France. 25th of December at Nice. The atonement is adequate. My dear papa, I shall no longer call you Monseigneur, nor even Monsieur. My petition succeeded before reaching you. Our tears are dried. You love us. You tell us so. You are in good health and are as roguish as ever, since you are planning to steal me from Bouillon and to take me on a trip to America without letting anyone know it. Everything is as usual. I recognize your fine mask, and I am wholly satisfied. But, my good papa, why say you that you write French badly, that your pleasantries in that language are only nonsense? To make an academic discourse one must be a good grammarian, but to write to our friends all we need is a heart, and you combine with the best heart, my lovable papa, when you wish the soundest ethics, a lively imagination, and that roguishness so pleasant, which shows that the wisest man in the world allows his wisdom to be perpetually broken against the rocks of femininity. Write to me, therefore, write to me often and much, or from spite I shall learn English. I should want to know it quickly, and that would hurt me, as I have been forbidden all study, and you would be the cause of my ills for having refused me a few lines of your bad French, which my family and I, and we are not simpletons, consider very good. Ask my neighbors, Monsieur d'Estaing, Madame Helvetius, and her abbés, if it would be right for you to prejudice the improvement which the sun here has caused in my health, for the sake of a little amour propre, which is beneath my lord the ambassador Benjamin Franklin. One more letter from Franklin, and we shall cease to walk upon eggs. The French drapery is gone, and nothing is left but Saxon nudity. I'm charmed with the goodness of my spiritual guide, and resign myself implicitly to her conduct, as she promises to lead me to heaven in so delicious a road, when I could be content to travel thither, even in the roughest of all ways, with the pleasure of her company. How kindly partial to her penitent in finding him, on examining his conscience, guilty of only one capital sin, and to call that by the gentle name of foible. I lay fast hold of your promise to absolve me of all sins, past, present, and future, on the easy and pleasing condition of loving God, America, and my guide, above all things. I'm in rapture when I think of being absolved of the future. People commonly speak of 10 commandments. I've been taught that there are 12. The first was increase and multiply and replenish the earth. The 12th is a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another. It seems to me that they are a little misplaced, and that the last should have been the first. However, I never made any difficulty about that, but was always willing to obey them both whenever I had an opportunity. Pray tell me, dear casuist, whether my keeping religiously these 2 commandments, though not in the Decalogue, may not be accepted in compensation for my breaking so often one of the 10. I mean that which forbids coveting my neighbor's wife, and which I confess I break constantly, God forgive me, as often as I see or think of my lovely confessor, and I'm afraid I should never be able to repent of the sin, even if I had the full possession of her. And now I am consulting you upon a case of conscience. I will mention the opinion of a certain father of the Church, which I find myself willing to adopt, though I'm not sure it is orthodox. It is this, that the most effectual way to get rid of a certain temptation is, as often as it returns, to comply with and satisfy it. Pray instruct me how far I may venture to practice upon this principle. But why should I be so scrupulous when you have promised to absolve me of the future? Adieu, my charming conductress, and believe me ever with the sincerest esteem and affection, your most obedient, humble servant, B.F. End of section 32. Section 33 of Benjamin Franklin, Self-Revealed, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Chapter 7, Part 4, Franklin's French Friends. It would be easy enough to treat this correspondence too seriously when we recall the social sympathies and diversions which drew the parties to it together, the advanced age of Franklin, the friendly relations sustained by him to all the members of the Brillant household, his attempt to bring about a matrimonial union between Temple Franklin and the daughter of Madame Brillant, the good-humoured complaisance of Monsieur Brillant, the usages of Parisian society at that time, the instinctive ease with which Franklin adopted the tone of any land in which he happened to be, and the sport of grace and freedom brought by his wit and literary dexterity to every situation that invited their exercise, we might well infer that perhaps, after all, on his part as well, on that of the clever coquette, whose bodkin was quite as keen as his sword, it was understood that the liaison was to be only a paper one, an encounter of wit rather than of love. From first to last, the attitude of Madame Brillon towards Franklin was simply that of a beautiful and brilliant woman to whom coquetry was an art, and whose intellectual activity had been stimulated and vanity gratified by the homage of a brilliant, magnetic, and famous man, who possessed to a remarkable degree the faculty of rendering his splendid intellectual powers subservient to purely social uses. It was no slight thing to a woman such as Madame Brillon to be the vainqueur du vainqueur de la terre, and little less than this did all France at that time insist that Franklin was. There is nothing in her letters to Franklin to indicate that she ever really had any thought of allowing him any greater degree of intimacy with her than he actually enjoyed. On that point she was apparently as firm as she was in her courteous and kindly but inflexible opposition to a marriage between her daughter and William Temple Franklin. "I despise slanderers," she wrote to Franklin on one occasion, "and am at peace with myself. But that is not enough. One must submit to what is called propriety. That word varies in each century, in each country. To sit less often on your knees. I shall certainly love you none the less, nor will our hearts be more or less pure, but we shall close the mouth of the malicious, and it is no slight thing even for the sage to silence them." On the other hand, there is much to support the idea that the motive at the back of Franklin's letters to Madame Brillon was very much the same as that which inspired the Journey to the Elysian Fields and the Ephemera. They were, to a great extent at any rate, mere literary bagatelles, as those performances were, the offerings of an opulent wit and fancy at the shrine of beauty and fashion, which, to be successful in an academic sense, had to be informed by the spirit and attuned to the note of the time and place. All the same, the letters from Franklin to Madame Brillon are painful reading. Like not a little else in his life, they tend to confirm the impression that upright, courageous, public-spirited, benevolent, loving, and faithful in friendship as he was, on the sensual side of his nature he was lamentably callous to the moral laws and conventions and the personal and social refinements which legitimize and dignify the physical intercourse of the sexes. The pinchbeck glitter, the deceitful vacuity of his moral regimen and order of virtue assume an additional meaning when we see him mumbling the cheek of Madame Brillon, and month after month and year after year writing to her in strains of natural or affected concupiscence. It was things of this sort which have assisted in strengthening the feeling, not uncommon, that Franklin's art of virtue was a purely counterfeit thing, and the moralist himself an untrustworthy guide to righteous conduct. In a letter to M. de Veillard, Franklin, after his return to America from France, referred to the Brillon family as that beloved family. Restored to his home surroundings, he forgot his French lines and was again as soberly American as ever in thought and speech. Who would recognize the lover of Madame Brillon in this russet picture that he paints of himself in his 83rd year in a letter to her? "You have given me pleasure by informing me of the welfare and present agreeable circumstances of yourself and children, and I am persuaded that your friendship for me will render a similar account of my situation pleasing to you. I am in a country where I have the happiness of being universally respected and beloved, of which 3 successive annual elections to the chief magistracy, in which elections the representatives of the people in assembly and the Supreme Court joined and were unanimous, is the strongest proof. This is a place of profit as well as of honor, and my friends cheerfully assist in making the business as easy to me as possible." After a word more with regard to the dwelling and the dutiful family, so often mentioned in his twilight letters, he concludes in this manner: "My rents and incomes are amply sufficient for all my present occasions, and if no unexpected misfortunes happen during the time I have to live, I shall leave a handsome estate to be divided among my relatives. As to my health, it continues the same, or rather better than when I left Passy, but being now in my 83rd year, I do not expect to continue much longer a sojourner in this world, and begin to promise myself much gratification of my curiosity in soon visiting some other. In this letter, Franklin was looking forward, we hardly need to say, to a very different world from the one where Madame Brillon was to be the second Mrs. Franklin, and they were to eat together apples of paradise roasted with butter and nutmeg. And it is only just to the memory of Madame Brillon to recall the genuine words, so unlike the tenor of her former letters to Franklin, in which she bade him farewell when he was leaving the shores of France. I had so full a heart yesterday in leaving you that I feared for you and myself a grief-stricken moment which could only add to the pain which our separation causes me, without proving to you further the tender and unalterable affection that I vowed to you for always. Every day of my life I shall recall that a great man, a sage, was willing to be my friend. My wishes will follow him everywhere. My heart will regret him incessantly. Incessantly I shall say, I passed 8 years with Dr. Franklin. They have flown, and I shall see him no more. Nothing in the world could console me for this loss, except the thought of the peace and happiness that you are about to find in the bosom of your family. It was to the Comtesse Dudatot of Rousseau's Confessions, however, that Franklin was indebted for his social apotheosis in France. In a letter to her after his return to America, he calls her ma chère et toujours amiable amie, and declares that the memory of her friendship and of the happy hours that he had passed in her sweet society at Sanois had often caused him to regret the distance which made it impossible for them to ever meet again. In her letters to him after his return to America, she seeks in such words as homage, veneration, and religious tenderness to express the feelings with which he had inspired her. In these letters there are also references to the fête champêtre which she gave in his honor at her country seat at Sanois on the 12th day of April in the year 1781, and which was one of the celebrated events of the time. When it was announced that Franklin's carriage was approaching the chateau, the Countess and a distinguished retinue of her relations set out on foot to meet him. At a distance of about half a mile from the chateau, they came upon him and gathered around the doors of his carriage and escorted it to the grounds of the chateau, where the Countess herself assisted Franklin to alight. The venerable sage, said a contemporary account, with his gray hairs flowing down upon his shoulders, his staff in his hand, the spectacles of wisdom on his nose, was the perfect picture of true philosophy and virtue. As soon as Franklin had descended from the carriage, the whole company grouped themselves around him, and the Countess declaimed, with proper emphasis we may be sure, these lines: Soul of heroes and wise men, O liberty, first boon of the gods! Alas, it is too remotely that we pay thee our vows. It is only with sighs that we render homage to the man who made happy his fellow citizens. All then wended their way through the gardens of the Countess to the chateau, where they were soon seated at a noble feast. With the first glass of wine a soft air was played, and the Countess and her relations rose to their feet and sang in chorus these lines, which they repeated in chorus after every succeeding glass of wine. Of Benjamin let us celebrate the renown. Let us sing the good that he has done to mortals. In America he will have altars, and at Sanois we drink to his fame. When the time for the second glass of wine came, the Countess sang this quatrain: He gives back to human nature its rights. To free it he would first enlighten it, and virtue to make itself adored assume the form of Benjamin. And at the third glass the Vicomte Dudatot sang these words: William Tell was brave but savage. More highly our dear Benjamin I prize. While shaping the destiny of America, at meat he laughs just as does your true sage. And at the fourth glass the Vicomtesse Dudatot sang these words: I say live Philadelphia too. Freedom has its allurement for me. In that country I would gladly dwell, though neither ball nor comedy is there. And at the fifth class Madame de Pernon sang these words: all our children shall learn of their mothers to love, to trust, and to bless you. You teach that which may reunite all the sons of men in the arms of one father. And at the sixth class the aged Comte de Tresson sang these words: live Sanois, 'tis my Philadelphia. When I see here its dear lawgiver, I grow young again in the heart of delight, and I laugh and I drink and list to Sophie. And at the seventh class the Comte d'Apcher sang these lines, in which some violence was done to the facts of English history, and the French Revolution was foreshadowed. To uphold that sacred charter which Edward accorded to the English, I feel that there is no French knight who does not desire to use his sword. And so quatrain preceded glass, and chorus followed quatrain, until every member of the eulogistic company had sung his or her song. The banqueters then rose from the table, and the Countess, followed by her relations, conducted Franklin to an arbor in her gardens, where he was presented with a Virginia locust by her gardener, which he was asked to honor the family by planting with his own hands. When he had done so, the Countess declaimed some additional lines, which were afterwards inscribed upon a marble pillar erected near the tree. Sacred tree, lasting monument of the sojourn deigned to be made here by a sage, of these gardens henceforth the pride, receive here the just homage of our vows and of our incense. And may you, for all the ages, for ever respected by time, live as long as his name, his laws, and his deeds. On their way back to the chateau, the concourse was met by a band which played an accompaniment, while the Countess and her kinsfolk sang this song: May this tree, planted by his benevolent hand, lifting up its newborn trunk above the sterile elm by its odoriferous flower, make fragrant all this happy hamlet. The lightning will lack power to strike it, and will respect its summit and its branches. 'Twas Franklin who, by his prosperous labors, taught us to direct or to extinguish that, while he was destroying other evils, still more for the earth's sake to be pitied. This over, all returned to the chateau, where they were engaged for some time in agreeable conversation. In the late afternoon, Franklin was conducted by the Countess and the rest to his carriage, and when he was seated, they gathered about the open door of the vehicle, and the Countess addressed her departing guest in these words: Legislator of one world and benefactor of two, for all time mankind will owe thee its tribute, and it is but my part that I here discharge of the debt that is thy due from all the ages. The door of the carriage was then closed, and Franklin returned to Paris, duly deified, but as invincibly sensible as ever. Another Frenchwoman with whom Franklin was on terms of familiar affection was the wife of his friend Jean-Baptiste Leroy. His endearing term for her was petite femme de poche, little pocket wife, and in a letter after his return to Philadelphia she assured him that as long as his petite femme de poche had the breath of life she would love him. On one occasion, when he was in France, she wrote to him, asking him to dine with her on Wednesday, and saying that she would experience great pleasure in seeing and embracing him. Assuredly, he replied, he would not fail her. He found too much pleasure in seeing her and in hearing her speak, and too much happiness when he held her in his arms, to forget an invitation so precious. In another letter to her after his return to America, the letter which drew forth her declaration that her love for him would last as long as her breath, he told her that she was very courageous to ascend so high in a balloon, and very good when she was so near heaven not to think of quitting her friends and remaining with the angels. Competition might well have shunned an effort to answer such a flourish as that in kind, but a lady who had been up in a balloon among the angels was not the person to lack courage for any experiment. She only regretted, she said, that the balloon could not go very far, for if it had been but able to carry her to him, she would have been among the angels, and would have given him proofs of the respect and esteem for him ineffaceably engraved upon her heart. Sad to relate, in the same letter she tells Franklin that her husband had proved hopelessly recreant in every principle of honor and good feeling. We say sad to relate, not for general reasons only, but because Franklin, when he had heard in 1772 that Leroy was well and happily married, had felicitated him on the event, and repeated his oft asserted statement that matrimony is the natural condition of man. Though he omitted this time his usual comparison of celibacy with the odd half of a pair of scissors, the estrangement between his little pocket wife and her husband, however, did not affect his feeling of devoted friendship for Jean-Baptiste Leroy. Some 2 years and 5 months later, when the wild Walpurgis night of the French Revolution was setting in, he wrote to Leroy to find out why he had been so long silent. "It is now more than a year," he said, "since I have heard from my dear friend Leroy. What can be the reason? Are you still living? Or have the mob of Paris mistaken the head of a monopolizer of knowledge for a monopolizer of corn, and paraded about the streets upon a pole?" The fact that Leroy, who was a physicist of great reputation, was a member of both the American Philosophical Society and the Royal Society, led Franklin in one of his letters to address him as his "dear double confrère." Leroy's 3 brothers, Pierre, Charles, and David, were also friends of Franklin. Indeed, in a letter to Jean-Baptiste, Franklin spoke of David, to whom he addressed his valuable paper entitled "Maritime Observations," as "our common brother." Other friendships formed by Franklin with women in France were those with Madame Lavoisier, Madame de Forbach, and Mademoiselle Plainville. Madame Lavoisier was first the wife of the famous chemist of that name, and after he was guillotined during the French Revolution, the wife of the equally famous Benjamin Thompson, Count Rumford. She painted a portrait of Franklin and sent it to him at Philadelphia. "It is allowed by those who have seen it," he wrote to her, "to have great merit as a picture in every respect, but what particularly endears it to me is the hand that drew it. Our English enemies, when they were in possession of this city, Philadelphia, and my house, made a prisoner of my portrait and carried it off with them, leaving that of its companion, my wife, by itself a kind of widow. You have replaced the husband, and the lady seems to smile as well pleased." So his Eurydice, as soon as the enchantments of the French sorceress lost their power, was reunited to him after all. Among his French friends, Madame de Forbach, the Dowager Duchess of Deux-Ponts, was conspicuous for the number of the presents that she made to him. Among others was the fine Crabtree walking stick surmounted with a gold head, wrought in the form of a cap of liberty, which he bequeathed to Washington. Other gifts of hers are alluded to in a letter from Franklin to her, acknowledging the receipt of a pair of scissors. "It is true," he said, "that I can now neither walk abroad nor write at home without having something that may remind me of your goodness towards me. You might have added that I can neither play at chess nor drink tea without the same sensation, but these have slipped your memory. There are people who forget the benefits they receive. Madame de Forbach, only those she bestows." His only letter to Mademoiselle Plainville is addressed to "Ma chère enfant," and is signed "Your loving papa." It helps, along with innumerable other kindred scraps of evidence, to prove how infirm is the train of reasoning which seeks to establish a parental tie between Franklin and any one simply upon the strength of his epistolary assumption of fatherhood. He might as well be charged with polygamy, because he addressed so many persons as "my wife" or "ma femme." This letter also has its interest as exemplifying the natural manner in which he awaited the sedan chair that was to bear him away from his fleshly tenement. "I've been harassed with illness this last summer," he told her, "am grown old, near 83, and find myself very infirm, so that I expect to be soon called for." This is far from being a complete list of the French women with whom Franklin was on terms of affectionate intimacy. To go no further, we know that Madame Brillon, in addition to writing to him on one occasion, "Give this evening to my amiable rival, Madame Helvetius, kiss her for yourself and for me," granted him on another a power of attorney to kiss for her until her return, whenever he saw them, her two neighbors, Le Vaillard and her pretty neighbor Caillot. The truth is that Franklin had a host of friends of both sexes in France. When Thomas Paine visited that country after the return of Franklin to America, he wrote to the latter that he found his friends in France very numerous and very affectionate, and we can readily believe it. Among them were Buffon, Condorcet, Lafayette, then the Duc de Rochefoucauld, Lavoisier, Castelux, Grand, Dupont, Dubourg, and Le Vaillard. To Buffon, the great naturalist, Franklin was drawn by common scientific sympathies. Like Franklin, he became a sufferer from the stone, and one of the results was a letter in which the former, in reply to an inquiry from him as to how he obtained relief from the malady, stated that his remedy was to take, on going to bed, the bigness of a pigeon's egg of jelly of blackberries, which in the eyes of modern medical science was, as a palliative, hardly more effective than a bread pill. With Condorcet, the philosopher, Franklin was intimate enough to call him, and to be called by him, my dear and illustrious confrère. And it was he, it is worthy of mention, who happily termed Franklin the modern Prometheus. For Lafayette, that winning figure forever fixed in the American memory, despite his visit to America in old age, in immortal youth and freshness, like the young lover and the happy boughs on Keats's Grecian urn, Franklin had a feeling not unlike that of Washington. In referring to the expedition against England, in which Temple Franklin was to have accompanied Lafayette, Franklin said in a letter to the latter, "I flatter myself, too, that he might possibly catch from you some tincture of those engaging manners that make you so much the delight of all that know you." In another letter he observed, in reply to the statement by Lafayette that the writer had had enemies in America, "You are luckier, for I think you have none here nor anywhere." When it became his duty to deliver to Lafayette the figured sword presented to the latter by Congress, he performed the office, though ill health compelled him to delegate the actual delivery of the gift to his grandson in the apt and pointed language which never failed him upon such occasions. "By the help," he said, "of the exquisite artists France affords, I find it easy to express everything but the sense we have of your worth and our obligations to you. For this, figures and even words are found insufficient." Through all his letters to Lafayette there is a continuous suggestion of cordial attachment to both him and his wife. When Lafayette wrote to him that Madame de Lafayette had just given birth to a daughter, and that he was thinking of naming her Virginia, he replied, "In naming your children, I think you do well to begin with the most ancient state. And as we cannot have too many of so good a race, I hope you and Madame de Lafayette will go through the 13." This letter was written at Passy. In a later letter to Lafayette, written at Philadelphia, he concluded by saying, "You will allow an old friend of fourscore to say he loves your wife, when he adds, and children, and prays God to bless them all." End of section 33. Section 34 of Benjamin Franklin, Self-Revealed, Volume 1, by William Bruce. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7, Part 5, Franklin's French Friends. For the Duc de la Rochefoucauld, he entertained the highest respect as well as a cordial feeling of friendship. The good Duke, he terms him in a letter to Dr. Price, and it was to the judgment of the Duke and Monsieur Le Vaillard in France, as it was to that of Vaughan and Dr. Price in England, as we shall see, that he left the important question as to whether any of the autobiography should be published, and if so, how much. Among the many tributes paid to his memory was a paper on his life and character read by the Duke before the Society of 1789. One of the Duke's services to America was that of translating into French, at the request of Franklin, for European circulation, all the constitutions of the American states. Lavoisier was a member with Franklin of the commission which investigated the therapeutic value of mesmerism and exposed the imposture of Mesmer. There are no social incidents in the intercourse of the two men friendly as it was, so far as we know, worthy of mention. But in a passage in one of Franklin's letters to Jan Ingenhouse, we have a glimpse of the master of whom, when guillotined after the brutal declaration of Coffenhall, the president of the Revolutionary Tribunal, that the Republic had no need for savants, Lagrange remarked, they needed but a moment to lay that head low, and 100 years perhaps will not be sufficient to reproduce its like. Speaking of an experiment performed by Lavoisier, Franklin wrote to Jan Ingenhouse, he kindled a hollow charcoal and blew into it a stream of dephlogisticated air. In this focus, which is said to be the hottest fire human art has yet been able to produce, he melted platina in a few minutes. Franklin's friend, the Chevalier, afterwards Marquis de Castellux, who served with the Comte de Rochambeau in America and was the author of the valuable Travels in North America in the years 1780, 81, and 82, succeeded in making himself as agreeable to American women as Franklin succeeded in making himself to French women. There is an echo of this popularity in one of Franklin's letters to him. Dare I confess to you, he said, when he was still at Passy and the Chevalier was still in America, that I am your rival with Madame G. Franklin's Katie. I need not tell you that I am not a dangerous one. I perceive that she loves you very much, and so does dear sir yours, etc. Through the influence of Leray de Chaumont, Ferdinand Grand, who was a Swiss Protestant, became the banker of our representatives in France, and after Franklin's return to America, he remained entrusted with some of Franklin's private funds, upon which the latter was in the habit of drawing from time to time. The correspondence between Franklin and himself is almost wholly lacking in social interest, but it indicates a deep feeling of affection upon Franklin's part. For Dupont de Nemours, the distinguished economist and the founder of the family which has been so conspicuous in the industrial, military, and naval history of the United States, Franklin cherished a feeling distinctly friendly. His acquaintance with Dupont, as well as with Dubourg, who, like Dupont, was a member of the group of French economists known as the Physiocrats, was formed, as we have seen before, his mission to France. The correspondence between Franklin and Dupont, however, like that between Franklin and Grand, has but little significance for the purposes of this chapter. This, however, is not true of the relations between Dr. Barbeau Dubourg, a medical practitioner of high standing, and Franklin. They not only opened their minds freely to each other upon a considerable variety of topics, but their intercourse was colored by cordial association. Of all the men who came under the spell of Franklin's genius, Dubourg, who was, to use Franklin's own words, a man of extensive learning, was one of the American philosopher's most enthusiastic pupils. My dear master was the term that he habitually used in speaking of him, and his reverence for the object of his admiration led him to translate into French, with some additions, the edition of Franklin's scientific papers brought out in London by David Henry in 1769. Nothing that he had ever written, he told his master, had been so well received as the preface to his compilation. So great, he declared, is the advantage of soaring in the shadow of Franklin's wings. We pass by the communications from Franklin to Dubourg on purely scientific subjects. One letter from the former to him brings to our knowledge a curious habit into which Franklin was drawn by the uncompromising convictions that he entertained in regard to the origin of bad colds and the virtues of ventilation, of which we shall hereafter speak more particularly. You know, he said, the cold bath has long been in vogue here as a tonic, but the shock of the cold water has always appeared to me, generally speaking, as too violent, and I have found it much more agreeable to my constitution to bathe in another element. I mean cold air. With this view I rise almost every morning and sit in my chamber without any clothes whatever, half an hour or an hour, according to the season, either reading or writing. This practice is not in the least painful, but on the contrary agreeable. And if I return to bed afterwards before I dress myself, as sometimes happens, I make a supplement to my night's rest of 1 or 2 hours of the most pleasing sleep that can be imagined. I find no ill consequences whatever resulting from it, and that at least it does not injure my health, if it does not in fact contribute much to its preservation. Another letter from Franklin to Dubourg is a dissertation on swimming, the only form of outdoor exercise to which he was addicted, but in which he was throughout his life such an adept that he could even make the following entry in his journal when he was at Southampton on his return to America from France. I went at noon to bathe in Martin's salt-water hot bath, and floating on my back fell asleep and slept near an hour by my watch without sinking or turning, a thing I never did before and should hardly have thought possible. Water is the easiest bed that can be. In the letter to Dubourg he recalls the assertion of a Monsieur Robinson that fat persons with small bones float most easily upon the water, makes a passing reference to the diving bell and the swimming waistcoat, now known as the life preserver, and suggests the comfort of varying the progressive motion of swimming by turning over occasionally upon one's back and otherwise. He also states that the best method of allaying cramp is to give a sudden, vigorous, and violent shock to the affected region, which may be done in the air as the swimmer swims along on his back, and recalls an incident illustrative of the danger of throwing oneself when thoroughly heated into cold spring water. The exercise of swimming, he declared, is one of the most healthy and agreeable in the world. After having swam for an hour or two in the evening, one sleeps coolly the whole night, even during the most ardent heat of summer. Perhaps the pores being cleansed, the insensible perspiration increases and occasions this coolness. It is certain that much swimming is the means of stopping a diarrhea, and even of producing a constipation. In this letter, too, Franklin tells Dubourg how, when he was a boy, he quickened his progress in swimming by aiding the stroke of his hands with oval pallets, and attempted to do so by attaching a kind of sandals to the soles of his feet, and also how, in his boyhood, on one occasion he lay on his back in a pond and let his kite draw him across it without the least fatigue, and with the greatest pleasure imaginable. He thought it not impossible to cross in this manner from Dover to Calais. Another letter from Franklin to Dubourg, and on what he calls the doctrines of life and death, is a delightful example of both his insatiable inquisitiveness and the readiness with which he could give a pleasant fillip to any subject, however grave. He is speaking of some common flies that had been drowned in Madeira wine, apparently about the time when it was bottled in Virginia to be sent to London, where the writer was at the opening of one of the bottles. At the house of a friend where I then was, he said, 3 drowned flies fell into the first glass that was filled. Having heard it remarked that drowned flies were capable of being revived by the rays of the sun, I proposed making the experiment upon these. They were therefore exposed to the sun upon a sieve, which had been employed to strain them out of the wine. In less than 3 hours 2 of them began by degrees to recover life. They commenced by some convulsive motions of the thighs, and at length they raised themselves upon their legs, wiped their eyes with their forefeet, beat and brushed their wings with their hind feet, and soon after began to fly, finding themselves at old England without knowing how they came thither. The third continued lifeless till sunset, when, losing all hopes of him, he was thrown away. I wish it were possible from this instance to invent a method of embalming drowned persons in such a manner that they may be recalled to life at any period, however distant, for having a very ardent desire to see and observe the state of America 100 years hence, I should prefer to any ordinary death the being immersed in a cask of Madeira wine, with a few friends till that time, to be then recalled to life by the solar warmth of my dear country. But since in all probability we live in an age too early and too near the infancy of science to hope to see such an art brought in our time to its perfection, I must for the present content myself with the treat which you are so kind as to promise me of the resurrection of a fowl or turkey cock. The friendship of Dubourg for Franklin bore good fruit for America when the American Revolution came on, for a sanguine letter from him exerted a determining influence in inducing Congress to send Franklin to France. Le Villard, who was a neighbor of Franklin at Passy, was one of the friends whom Franklin loved as he loved Hugh Roberts or John Hughes, Strahan or Jan Ingenhouse, and this feeling, as usual, included the members of his friend's family. Public cares, he wrote to Le Villard, after his return to America, could not make him forget that he and Le Villard loved one another. In the same letter he spoke of Madame Le Villard as the best of good women, and of her daughter as the amiable daughter who, he thought, would tread in her footsteps. In a later letter he told Le Villard that he could not give him a better idea of his present happiness in his family than by informing him that his daughter had all the virtues of a certain good lady whom Le Villard allowed him to love. The same tender affections and intentions, ingenuity, industry, economy, etc., embrace that good dame for me warmly, and the amiable daughter, he added. My best wishes attend the whole family, whom I shall never cease to love while I am B. Franklin. This wealth of affection was richly repaid. The closest relations existed between Franklin and the Le Villard family while he was in France, and when he left that country, Le Villard was not content to accompany him simply to the sea-coast, but was his companion as far as Southampton. To him, Abel James, Benjamin Vaughan, and the Shipleys, we are beholden for the fact that the autobiography was brought down to the year 1757, there to stop like the unfinished tower which tantalized the world with a haunting sense of its rare worth and incompleteness, like a faithful good wife who avails herself of her intimacy with her husband to bring the continuous pressure of her influence to bear upon him for the purpose of arousing him to a proper sense of his duty. Le Villard spared neither entreaty nor reproach to secure additions to the precious Sibylline leaves of the autobiography. You blame me for writing 3 pamphlets and neglecting to write the little history, Franklin complained. You should consider they were written at sea, out of my own head, and the other could not so well be written there for want of the documents that could only be had here. After this bit of self-defense, Franklin goes on to describe his physical condition. He realized that the stone in his bladder had grown heavier, he said, but on the whole it did not give him more pain than when he was at Passy, and except in standing, walking, or making water, he was very little incommoded by it. Sitting or lying in bed, he was generally quite easy, God be thanked, and as he lived temperately, drank no wine, and used daily the exercise of the dumb-bell, he flattered himself that the stone was kept from augmenting so much as it might otherwise do, and that he might still continue to find it tolerable. People who live long, the unconquerable devotee of human existence, declared, who will drink of the cup of life to the very bottom must expect to meet with some of the usual dregs. The view taken by Franklin in this letter of his physical condition was entirely too cheerful to work any alteration in the resolution of Le Villard that the autobiography should be completed if the unremitting appeal of an old friend could prevail. In a subsequent letter, Franklin tells him that in Philadelphia his time was so cut to pieces by friends and strangers that he had sometimes envied the prisoners in the Bastille. His 3 years of service as president, however, would expire in the succeeding October, and he had formed the idea of retiring then to Temple's farm at Rancocas, where he would be free from the interruption of visits and could complete the work for Le Villard's satisfaction. In the meantime, in view of the little remnant of life left to him, the accidents that might happen before October, and Le Villard's earnest desire, he had resolved to proceed with the autobiography the very next day and to go on with it daily until finished. This, if his health permitted, might be in the course of the ensuing summer. In a still later letter, Franklin declared that Le Villard was a hard taskmaster to his friend. You insist, he said, on his writing his life, already a long work, and at the same time would have him continually employed in augmenting the subject, while the time shortens in which the work is to be executed. Some months later he is able to send to Le Viard the joyful intelligence that he had recently made great progress in the work that his friends so urgently demanded, and that he had come as far as his 50th year. Indeed, he even stated that he expected to have the work finished in about 2 months, if illness or some unforeseen interruption did not prevent. This expectation was not realized, and the reason for it is stated in painful terms in a subsequent letter from Franklin to Le Viard. "I have long time," he said, "been afflicted with almost constant and grievous pain, to combat which I have been obliged to have recourse to opium, which indeed has afforded me some ease from time to time, but then it has taken away my appetite, and so impeded my digestion that I am become totally emaciated, and little remains of me but a skeleton covered with a skin. In this situation I have not been able to continue my memoirs, and now I suppose I shall never finish them. Benjamin has made a copy of what is done for you, which shall be sent by the first safe opportunity." The copy was subsequently sent to Le Viard, and after the death of Franklin was given by him to William Temple Franklin, to whom Franklin bequeathed most of his papers in exchange for the original manuscript of the autobiography. The motive for the exchange was doubtless the desire of Temple to secure the most legible copy that he could find for the printer of his edition of his grandfather's works. The original manuscript finally became the property by purchase of the late John Bigelow. There is reason to believe that even after the receipt of the copy of the autobiography, Le Viard still cherished the hope that the work might be brought down to a later date. Writing to Le Viard only a few days before Franklin's death, Jefferson said, "I wish I could add to your happiness by giving you a favorable account of the good old doctor. I found him in bed, where he remains almost constantly. He had been clear of pain for some days, and was cheerful and in good spirits. He listened with a glow of interest to the details of your revolution and of his friends, which I gave him. He is much emaciated. I pressed him to continue the narration of his life, and perhaps he will." That Le Viard had a lively mind we may well infer from an amusing paragraph in one of his letters to Franklin, in which he pictures the jealousy with which Madame Helvetius and Madame Brillon regarded each other after the departure of Franklin from France. "You had 2 good friends here," he said, "who might have lived harmoniously enough with each other, because they almost never saw each other, and you assured each of them privately that it was she that you loved the best. But do you venture to write to one and keep silent to the other? The first does not fail to brag and show her letter everywhere. What do you wish to become of the other? 2 women draw their knives, their friends take sides, the war becomes general. Now see what you have done. You set fire with a bit of paper to one half of the world, you who have so effectively aided in pacifying the other half." It was a singularly unhappy prophecy that Franklin, after his return to Philadelphia, made to this friend whose lips were so soon to be dyed with the red wine of the guillotine. "When this fermentation is over," he wrote to him with regard to the popular tumults in which France was then involved, "and the troubling part subsided, the wine will be fine and good, and cheer the hearts of those who drink it." A bright letter from the daughter of Le Viard merits a passing word. In reply to the statement of Franklin that she did not embrace him with a good grace, she says, "You know doubtless a great number of things. You have travelled much, you know men, but you have never penetrated the head of a French girl. Well, I will tell you their secret. When you wish to embrace one, and she says that it does not pain her, that means that it gives her pleasure." Very dear, too, to Franklin was Dr. Jan Ingenhouse, the eminent scientist and physician to Maria Theresa. Many years after Franklin made his acquaintance, he received from Franklin the assurance that he had always loved him ever since he knew him with uninterrupted affection, and he himself in a previous letter to Franklin styled him in his imperfect English the most respectful of all his friends. Only a few of the numerous letters that Franklin must have written to this friend are known to be in existence, and these are not particularly interesting from a social point of view. In one respect, however, they strikingly evince the kindness of heart which made Franklin so lovable. As was true of many other Europeans of his time, Ingenhouse incurred considerable pecuniary loss in American business ventures, and like King David, who in his haste called all men liars, he was disposed at one time to call all Americans knaves. One of his American debtors, as we have already stated, was Samuel Wharton of Philadelphia. "I know we should be happy together," wrote Franklin to Ingenhouse when the writer was about to return to America, "and therefore repeat my proposition that you should ask leave of the Emperor to let you come and live with me during the little remainder of life that is left me. I'm confident his goodness would grant your request. You will be at no expense while with me in America. You will recover your debt from Wharton, and you will make me happy." And the letter concludes with the request that Ingenhouse, who shared his enthusiasm for electrical experiments, would let him know soon whether he would make him happy by accepting his invitation. Of instruments he declared in terms that remind us of Uncle Toby and Corporal Trim when they were planning their future military diversions together: "If the enemy did not destroy them all, and we will make plenty of experiments together." Such were the more conspicuous of the friendships which clustered so thickly about the life of Franklin. When we remember that all these men and women have with him said good night to his landlord of life and time, and gone off to their still chambers, we experience a feeling something like that of Xerxes when he gazed upon his vast army and reflected that not a man in it might return from Greece. The thought that there might never again be any movement in those cheerless rooms, nor any glimmer of recurring day, was well calculated to make one who loved his friends as Franklin did exclaim, "I too, with your poet, trust in God." The wide sweep of his sympathies and charities, the open prospect ever maintained by his mind, are in nothing made clearer to us than in the extent and variety of his friendships. They were sufficiently elastic, as we have seen, to include many diverse communities and such extremes as Joseph Watson and James Rolfe, George Whitefield and Lord Le Despencer, John Jay and General Charles Lee, Polly and Madame Brillon. The natural instinctive side of his character is brought to our attention very plainly in a letter from him to David Hartley, which reveals in an engaging manner the profound effect worked upon his imagination by a poor peasant, but veritable philosophe, who had walked all the way to Paris from one of the French provinces for the purpose of communicating a purely benevolent project to the world. But at the same time he never found any difficulty in accommodating himself to aberrant or artificial types of character, or to alien usages, customs, and modes of thought. He belonged to the genus Homo, not to the species Homo Americanus or Britannicus. Like the politic and much experienced Ulysses of Tennyson, familiar with cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, he could say, "I'm a part of all that I have met." Wherever he went into the world, he realized his own aspiration that the time might come when a philosopher could set his foot on any part of the earth and say, "This is my country." Wherever he happened to be, he was too exempt from local bias, thoughts, cherished feelings, and spoke a language too universal not to make a strong appeal to goodwill and friendship. End of section 34. End of Benjamin Franklin, Self-Revealed, Volume 1, by William Bruce.